Hello, this is the Stories Beside channel. I release videos every day for you. Subscribe and click the bell.
Michael took a pack of Marlboro Gold out of his pocket, unwrapped the cellophane wrapping, took out a cigarette, and held up the lighter. Taking 2 deep puffs, he looked around and thought a little. For the last 10 years of his life, he had been pedantically living on a schedule. He liked everything to be on time and hated people who were late. Michael calculated even little things like time to get on the platform and have time to smoke a cigarette before the train arrived. There were few people around. He was in a distant and small town, popularly called the hinterland. Michael was even surprised that there was a train station here. Suddenly, he felt some movement on his right. Turning his head, the man saw a short girl. She was wearing a simple dress, white and sneakers. She was carrying a heavy bag, but her pretty head with nice facial features was a red beret, which now and then struggled with a large braid of her dark hair. The girl with elegant sloppiness and was correcting the beret while trying to keep her bags in her hands. Michael looked at her sympathetically, tossed out a flick of the cigarette he had started, and went to help. Shaking his head slightly, he pronounced, "It's a bit heavy. Such a small girl to carry such heavy bags." Then he calmly took her luggage and they headed towards the train. "Oh, thank you very much." She thanked him. "What would I do without you? I'm here for my fiance's food." The girl looked at the man so sincerely that his heart gave a little twinge inside. She had big blue eyes and a dazzling smile. A smile that could make anyone speechless with admiration. Michael had not felt such feelings for a long time and did not understand what was happening to him. Then the girl asked, "Which carriage are you in?" "In the 9th, smiled the man. "Yes, and me too." "Could you?" "Could I?" Michael didn't let her finish, and at that moment he smiled even wider. Some part of him felt like a complete idiot. Meanwhile, the train was approaching the platform. 2 grandmothers sitting on a bench stood up and walked duck-like toward the cars. The train had only been stopped for 3 minutes, so the passengers on the platform scurried about. Michael and the girl quickened their step and quickly reached the 9th carriage. The conductor routinely checked their passports. Michael picked up their bags, and they were already walking down the corridor. "What compartment do you have?" he asked. "8th, the girl smiled. "And you?" "There you go." What a coincidence, he thought. Maybe we will go to the same station with her. Then he said, "It turns out we're neighbors. I'm in 8th grade too." "Wow, how it happens." The girl laughed. "So you didn't meet me by chance?" "I guess so." They went into the compartment. He put away in bags on the bottom shelf. She took out a bag from one of them and told Michael to get out so that she could change. The man stepped out into the corridor, leaned back and on his errand, and stared out the window at the summer afternoon heat. The train touched down and glimmered with. Michael saw endless green fields, and quite a large state of thought flowed easily in his head under the clatter of the train wheels. It's been a long time since he had been to his homeland, he thought. Homeland and Michael called not the city where his parents lived, but his grandmother's village. He used to spend vacations there when he was a boy. He and the other boys used to go fishing, ride bicycles, swim in the river, grill kebabs, and build a shisha. And when the weather was rainy, they would gather at his or Max's house, playing board games all day, or was that it? It was a glorious time, easy and carefree. He still kept in touch with some of the boys. Whenever possible, Michael tried to visit his parents and then stop by his grandmother's house when it was the weekend or when he went on vacation. But 3 years ago, his grandmother passed away. Michael loved her very much and took the loss very hard. He could not come to the funeral because he was on a business trip abroad for a long time. He tried to ask for an excuse, but his superiors wouldn't let him. As his supervisor William, with whom they'd always had a great relationship, put it, "Mike, honey, but I can't let you go. You know, not even for 3 days. You're too important around here. You go away and it's all over at once. Do you know how important our work is? Everyone understands. It's a tragedy. Your family's grieving, but my hands are tied. Understand that. Do your job and I'll clap so you can get a bonus." And only 3 years later, after a long business trip, he still managed to come to his homeland. He paid off his parents. They talked about this and that. Again, they asked when he would get married. But Michael had no one in mind. Then, when he was about to leave, his mother recommended that he take the train to his grandmother's village. She also told him where her grave was. Michael sank a little into his childhood memories. Suddenly, he heard he could leave. "I'm all done now." The girl wore a gray tracksuit and slippers. But even in spite of this appearance, she was charming. To himself, the man called her Cinderella. "I'll run and get you some tea." Michael did not like intimate conversations on the train with strangers, and he didn't really want tea. But to refuse such a nice girl was uncomfortable. So he said yes, go ahead. Try entered the compartment. Carefully, holding in her hands 2 steaming mugs of tea, she set them on the table, and Michael thanked her. He began to consider her even in that sports sweatshirt, and you could make out her beautiful figure. Without the birch, it was as if her braid had become twice as big. The girl looked thoughtfully out of the window. Simple country beauty, Michael thought. "My name is Becky," the girl said unexpectedly and extended a gentle palm to Michael. He shook her fingers, looked into her eyes, and answered Becky. "Becky then, and I'm Mike." "Michael then," the girl joked. He smiled at her. Then she asked him to stand up, pulled out her bag, and started getting food out of it. Apple pie, candy, cucumbers, tomatoes, eggs, green onions, and bread. "Will it be a week's ride on the train?" Michael thought to himself. "Mike, and you do not look just so," said the girl. "Treats the whole pie tea." "Try it. I made it myself. It's delicious." "No, Becky, thanks. I ate at my mom's before I went out until I was hungry." "Oh well, okay," shrug. "But if you want some, feel free to have some." There was a kind of emptiness in the man's mind, mixed with a strange excitement. He realized he liked her. The girl was attractive, but she has a fiancé, Michael told himself. You have to behave yourself. Damn, but she's really pretty. I'm going to the end of the line. Becky interrupted his thoughts. "You're the one who'll have to put up with me for 24 hours, Michael joked. At that, he felt his heart beat joyfully. Becky laughed, covered her mouth with her hand, and said, "No, I think you're very nice and kind." "Thank you. And I'm going to the military unit. I have Alex mine. You know where it is?" "Oh, come on." Michael marveled at those words. Of course he knew. "First of all, the military unit was only 1 in 20 kilometers from my grandmother's village. In the second place, he was also going to that unit because he was a military man. Ironically, his command had sent him there to serve. Further orders. Seriously not hiding his surprise, exclaimed Michael. Almost choked on his tea. "Oh, I'm sorry, I said something wrong." "No, it's just that I have to go to the military unit too." "Really, such a coincidence." The girl was amazed. "What about you? Are you in the military too?" "Well, you're military." "Military," he nodded and drank his tea. He was getting uncomfortable. "So you probably know my Alex." Michael looked at her in surprise. Alex Loud is a chief warrant officer. He has a funny last name. My mom always swears how I will marry before him with such a surname. The girl laughed. "And I've already decided everything for myself. You know that I will be with my last name entirely. I like it better than Loud." "What's your last name?" "Morris." "Loud," Michael said. And so he started to change it in conversation. "Oh, do you have a non-military last name?" "No, I'm sorry, but no offense. If I knew you, I'd think you sold toys to kids. You're just so kind and your last name is so cute." "Why are you frowning?" "I said something wrong." "Oh, I'm so sorry. You know, my mom always tells me I'm always saying the wrong thing." "No, it's okay." Michael tried to speak neutrally, not to give vent to his emotions, as he was always taught in the service. "I know you're Alex," he said and drank his tea again. There were different bad rumors about Alex Michael. Michael knew that he was not a fool to drink and often found himself on duty drunk. He was also accused several times of stealing military property, but nothing could be proved. To think, Michael thought to himself, such a beautiful girl, and got involved with a swindler and an alcoholic. How is it possible? Why do girls always fall in love with some assholes? But maybe he'll change with her. Maybe he changed for her. No, I saw his personnel file the other day. He's not fired just because there's no staff. That's what I have to say now. What do you know about my Alex? By the way, he's going to study to be a lieutenant. He's tired of being a chief warrant officer. What's your rank? Captain. Michael said dryly. Wow. And that's how many stars on your epaulettes? 5, asked Becky. And the man laughed heartily, not smart girls in military matters, and said 5 stars, Becky, only in Turkish hotels. And the captain has 4 stars. And she stretched out understandably. And can I speak to you? Unexpectedly suggested Michael. And let's. Becky agreed and again extended him a lovely hand. Wonderful. Where is it? You met Alex. I've been friends with him since high school. He was in the same class as me. In 10th grade, we started talking a lot, and in 11th grade on September 1st. Can you imagine, he took me to the park for a walk by the hand, took me and said, I can't live without you. The girl is very talented, portrayed the intonation of a lover. What made the 2 traveling companions laugh? That's what he said. Michael asked. That's what he said. So we started dating there. We graduated high school together. I went to our local institute. My dream is to study hard and go to school to work. I want to teach children Russian language and literature. How nice, Michael thought. And my Alex after school served a year in the same unit. By the way, I went to him all the time, as now I was waiting for him. He came back and said he would marry me. But first he'll go to warrant officer school. He liked the military very much. That's the whole story. I wanted to become an ensign quickly and return to the units. He also said that military men get apartments. When he graduates, he'll marry me. And we'll already have an apartment. It's great, isn't it? Do they already give apartments to military men? Michael replied, the state provides a serviceman with an apartment at the place of his service. A social lease agreement is drawn up there. Alex told me the same thing, I think. So we are all waiting. But the apartment is still missing. Alex says he's on some waiting list, and they won't give us an apartment yet. And I really need it, you know, Becky said, a little irritated. No, by the way, it's already 22, and I'm still living with my parents. All my girlfriends laugh at me. They've all gotten married. Some didn't have kids anymore, some left our town. Husbands, you know, families. And I'm even called an old maid. Can you imagine? It's a shame. So I keep asking Alex, when will we get an apartment? When? There's a clue. I say I'll go to work together and we'll take out a mortgage. No big deal, we'll pay it off. And he said he's out of his mind. You're going to work for these banks all your life. Where's the apartment? I'm waiting, you wait, and don't show off. Can you imagine? They can't do anything normal in the country. They promise everything. Oh, Becky sighed sadly at the end of her monologue. For a while, the fellow travelers rode in silence behind the window in a single green canvas left landscape. The train was traveling very fast, swaying slightly. The sun had already left the zenith and was lazily descending to the horizon. It was a little stuffy in the compartment, so Becky picked up a book and waved it away. I don't know why I'm telling you all this. You're asking yourself, the girl said. It's the atmosphere, Michael remarked. It's a train compartment. You want to talk about life. Sometimes I've heard that people open up to fellow travelers more than to friends or family. Something about them on the road. Becky was silent for a moment, looking out the window of the train. Then she said, everybody in town drinks, you know, it's so scary. My mother was a drinker all her life. My father died 2 years ago, kidney failure, so I was raised by my grandmother. She's my whole life. Never had a drop of alcohol in her entire life. Neither have I. How did I see all this? Oh, I'm not like that, guys. It's not for me. I'd rather study. And Alex is my drinking buddy, too. We've had a few fights about it. He keeps telling me to quit. I'll quit. When I marry you, I'll quit. I get a lieutenant. I'll quit. I'll quit. Yeah, Becky just started twiddling her thumbs. No apartment, no lieutenant, no marriage. Can you imagine? Oh, at least I'm drinking less. It's not what it used to be. But who knows? The man looked out the window. They were driving over a bridge over a river. There was a small village on the bank. Then the endless forest began again. "Are you married?" Becky asked. Michael answered sadly. "Oh, I'm sorry, please," worried the girl. "I didn't mean to." "It's okay. Are you divorced?" "Yes." "Why did the feelings disappear?" "I don't know," shrugged Michael. "Were there feelings there at all?" "I think she had more feelings for my wallet. I'm a military man, and my salary is good. I was on business trips, and they gave me an apartment, by the way. So she had her eye on me. I took care of her. Beautiful, I gave her expensive gifts. My father, I remember, was always against this marriage. He used to tell me, 'Oh, I don't like Mike. It's your Kate.' Oh, I don't like her. And I was so much in love with her, I didn't see or hear a thing. And that girl was just a plain old hustler. She came from some distant town to conquer Moscow. She saw me and realized there was something to be gained here. I proposed to her, and she had her head wrapped around my neck. 3 years of marriage, but I was always traveling on business. She needed a bigger apartment or a car. I took her to the sea twice a year. And children? Did she want children?" Becky asked. Michael waved his hand. "She was interested in nothing but money. Too bad I realized it only after the divorce. So then, I come from a business trip, I open the door to the apartment, and there she is with her lover." Becky guessed. "Madame, you think like a detective. I am still a mademoiselle." Coquettishly replied Becky, shooting her eyes at Michael. Then she felt a pleasant warmth spread through his body. "I haven't been married yet." Well, Michael continued. "Here we have a divorce of the maiden name. And you loved her?" Becky asked sympathetically. Very quietly said Michael, "You're bound to find someone better. She'll love you. She'll give birth to a bunch of kids, a whole company of soldiers." The girl laughed. Well, yes, the division supported her joke, Mike. "No, really. Here you are, a young and handsome captain with an apartment, with money. An enviable groom, I must say." The girl comically carried her arms at her sides, playfully moving her shoulders. "Does she really like me? Is she flirting with me?" Michael thought, looking at her. The two of them laughed. Then Becky asked, "After her, didn't you have anyone else? Did you look for one?" "Went to look for Sink. I'm always on business trips." "I see," she sighed. They spent the rest of the day in silence. Becky read a book. Michael napped for a bit. There were a couple of stops in equally distant villages, but no one sat in the compartment. He would go out to smoke on the platform and watch people get out of the carriage. At one station, he bought potato pies from his grandmother and appetizingly sliced them with tea. It didn't take long for dusk to come, and then night. There were many stars in the sky. The moon was shining brightly, and the lanterns ran caressingly through the windows of the compartment. Becky turned off the lamp and pronounced, "But good night." "Good night," Michael replied. But he could not sleep. He thought about his life, and recently from a business trip. He also looked at the sleeping Becky for a long time. He liked her. He even imagined how great it would be to live with her. You come back from a hard service, and such a beautiful girl meets you, feeds you, caresses you, puts you to bed. And her children would be very beautiful and healthy. No, what are you thinking? She's almost married. How so? Alcoholics themselves. But it's her choice. Okay, what's that got to do with you? Yeah, and then you think she'll be waiting for you on another business trip or hotspot. No, and she won't miss you. She is. Oh, and beautiful. He only slept for 45 minutes, waking up at 6 o'clock a.m. from his alarm clock. The man quickly headed for the restroom. The train outside the window was enough and over the fields. Were the orange colors riotous? At the mice in the restroom, he looked at himself in the mirror, brushed his teeth, went back in. Becky was already awake. "Good morning," he smiled. Morning, Becky smiled at him and stretched sweetly. He couldn't help but notice the way the girl slid her eyes over his shoulders and biceps. Michael was in excellent physical shape and exercised regularly. He was wearing a calfskin shirt and blue shorts. "How did you sleep?" he asked. "I always sleep well on the train. I get carsick." "And you?" "I hardly slept at all." "Really?" "Yes." "Oh, that must be hard for you." Becky sympathized. "Come on," Michael replied with boyish glee. "I'm used to it. Do you want tea or coffee?" "Oh, thanks. Can I get a coffee?" 3. One that you walk well in. Fine as long as my teeth are cleaner. While the girl was in the restroom, and Michael took coffee from the conductor and returned to the compartment. He took a black one without sugar. The girl came back with a towel around her neck. She unbraided her braid and gathered her long, dark brown hair into a ponytail that reached almost to the end of her shoulder blades. She thanked Michael, sat down across from him, and pulled out more food sausage wrapped in foil, cheese, bread, croissant, and vegetables. They had an appetizing breakfast, chatting sweetly as the sun appeared from beyond the horizon. A new day was beginning. There was one more stop for 3 minutes before the terminus. Michael decided to go out for a smoke. When the train stopped, he left the compartment, closed the door, took a couple of steps, and realized that he had forgotten his lighter on the table. He quickly returned, opened the door sharply, and right into his hands fell Becky. The man held her beautiful body, his palms ending up in her Natalia's. Becky's head rested against his chest. She raised her head and their eyes met. It seemed to her that the space was filled with lightning. "Oh," said the girl embarrassedly, pouring paint. "Why did you come back? I thought you were going for a smoke." "Yes, I was lost in words, Michael, looking at the beautiful face of the girl. God, she's so beautiful." Then he came to his senses and said, "I left my lighter on the table." She gently began to push him away with her palms and said, laughing, "And I wanted to go to the bathroom." "And here you are once, so the door, but take the lighter quickly. It's a parking lot. It's only 3 minutes. Wait," and then on the platform and greedily pulling Michael, "Thought how it was lucky I forgot the lighter." He remembered her big-eyed hands, as if he could still feel her spouse and her body. Becky watched him from the window. She thought of his strong arms. He also smelled so nice. She wanted to drown in that smell. She wanted him to hold her again, but not as an occasional traveler, but as a man in love. No, what can she do? She's been with Alexa a long time. What other people will think? And then he and her husband will be in the same unit. So you have to pull yourself together. It's better to be in his hands again and not think about anything. Michael came back smelling of tobacco. They looked at each other and smiled. They drove the rest of the way in silence. Becky pretended to be very interested in reading the book. Michael kept trying not to look at her, which was very hard for him. Soon they arrived at the final station. The man helped Becky to lower the bags. They stepped back a little. "Well, I guess we should catch a car. Make arrangements," Becky said, glancing at the drivers, who were already looking at them like kites. Do you want to go for a walk?" Mike suddenly suggested. He felt as if the words were spoken by someone else. The girl looked at him in surprise, but in her eyes there was interest and a little coquetry. "Let's take a walk. It's only 4 kilometers to grandmother's village. Let's walk along the field. It's going to be so beautiful. When I was a kid, I used to walk around the village all the time. I'll show you grandma's house." "So your grandmother lives nearby?" "Yeah. Why didn't you tell me before?" "Yeah," Michael scratched his head. The conversation wasn't working out. But it's clear that for a while the girl thought Michael really wanted her to go with him. He felt like a child waiting for his mom to hand him a present from Santa Claus. "Let's go for a walk," said Becky. "Oh, wait, what about my bags?" "You'll have a hard time carrying them, won't you? And they can leave them in the luggage room at the station," replied Mike. "We'll walk in the village, then take the bus. We'll come back here, pick up the bags, and go to the unit. How's that sound? It's tempting. Alex doesn't get off till 4 o'clock anyway. What did he tell me? There's plenty of time." They left their bags in the luggage room and were given the number 215. Then Michael led her along the field along a road he had taken many times when he visited his grandmother. Very often he would ride his bike to meet the boys, dawn and see off the sunset. And this birch tree was the first time he kissed a girl. He was 13 at the time. They were walking. Watching the tall grass move in the wind in a field in the distance was a forest. Michael used to tell us as a child. "Grandma will probably be glad when she sees you," Becky said. "Does she know you're coming, or is it a surprise?" "Well, she died 3 years ago." "Oh, Mike, I'm sorry, please." It was the first time she called him Mike since they'd been together. "What's the matter?" 1 minute it's the wife, 1 minute it's the grandmother. No, it's okay, Michael reassured her. It's not your fault. How could you have known? I didn't say anything. Anyway, I wanted to go to my grandmother's grave. I wasn't at her funeral because I was on a business trip. Then he paused, as if collecting his thoughts. It's weird, you're a strange girl. I'm taking you to my village for some reason. I told you I'm going to my grandmother's grave. Why am I suddenly taking you with me? You were not afraid of me. No, smiled the girl. I trust you. I feel that you are a good man and that you speak the truth. And if a man is a scoundrel, I can recognize it from a mile away, Becky said and lightly stroked his shoulder. Michael felt warm inside again. Believe me, for my 22 years I have seen different people in my life, and many of my beauty wanted to take advantage of. Well, you know, for what purposes? But I feel like you don't have that nasty stuff in you. You're a good person. Tell me more about your childhood. Are you that interesting to listen to? They moved on, and he kept feeling the touch of her hand on his shoulder. He felt warm inside from her voice, from the smell of her hair, from her look, from her laughter. Becky, on the other hand, felt very calm, as if she was completely safe and could fear nothing more. Everything was getting softer inside her. She wanted to stroke his mighty arm and to stare into his eyes for a long time. And Michael talked merrily and nonstop about his childhood, about the village, about his grandmother. Becky laughed, wondered, laughed loudly, pushing Michael on the shoulder. He told about playing soccer with the boys. One of the boys kicked the ball and broke the windows in Nikolaevich's house. He jumped out of the house and ran after them, swearing funny words. Then how Michael caught a big pike in the river and became the first guy in the village. How he tried pot and moonshine with his friends for the first time. How he fell in love with Anna and asked her out at night. How he and Ben made a bungee cord and jumped off it all summer long. She listened to him and listened to him. Slowly the houses of the village began to appear. I was thinking, Becky began, I guess we grew up in the same town, didn't we? Michael agreed. How come I've never met you before and never knew you? So I'm older than you. So what? How old are you? 30. Well, you're only 8 years older than me. We must have crossed paths sometime. What school did you go to? 9th. I was in 4th. What neighborhood did you live in downtown, you? I lived on South Side. You know where that is? Yeah, I do. It's a small town. That's what I'm saying. I'm surprised we haven't seen each other before. Becky. I left for military school when I was 18. You were only 10. How and where would we have crossed paths? Yes, while you were at home playing with dolls, I was already playing with boys in the yard, and even tried cigarettes. Yeah, Becky said. I was very young. Do you know Ustinov? No, I don't. Well, he's a cab driver now, and he used to make fun of me. It's hard for you not to, Michael complimented. Becky laughed and blushed a little. Who else? Maybe you know someone named William Jensen. No, I don't. Or I taught Brunson. My best friend since we were in diapers. No. The man kept smiling. Jenna. Corver's got the whole crew. Well, Alex ended up there too. I don't know. I know Ethan Simmons. Yeah, and to think. Martin Nance, you know him? Have you ever talked to him? The man was surprised. Well, the other guys were with him. He's in one company or the other. He's a drug addict. Yeah, they say he threw himself out of a window a year ago. While he was in the hospital. 6. Congratulations, Michael said. Of all the mutual acquaintances in our town, the only one we have in common is Martin Nance, the junkie. It's nice when such wonderful people bring other wonderful people together. Becky started laughing very loud and long. Michael looked at her and smiled. He liked being funny to her. He wanted to hear her laugh more and more often, probably for the rest of my life. Oh, we're getting close to the village, aren't we? My grandmother's cottage was my grandmother's cottage, Michael said. What's wrong with it now? Becky asked. For 3 years it's been empty. My father took everything out of there and boarded up the doors. It was decided to sell. The parents needed money. I help them as I can, but still not enough. Their paychecks are often late, and they have to pay the rent. They wanted to sell the house and put the proceeds into a mortgage. They put up an ad, but they haven't had a buyer in 3 years. Can you imagine how that could happen? And when I got back from my business trip, some guy came along. Tomorrow my father will come here, show him the plot, and negotiate with him. Well, he already wants to buy it. So technically this plot is still ours, but soon it won't be. Now it makes me sad. Becky asked sympathetically. A little, said Michael. This is where my happiest moments were. I remember my grandmother's apple pies. I come running hungry in the evening, but I fly at them like locusts, eat everything, and she looks at me and smiles. Eat, eat, sweetie. Then I go on with the boys to run around, and she sits down to cut a sweater for winter for me or my father. A tear glistened in the man's eyes. Commander, do you have a cigarette? Michael was awakened from his thoughts by an unpleasant shout. He looked to the right and saw 2 guys about 25 years old. They were sitting on a pile of firewood and seeing him and the girl, headed in their direction. Why wouldn't they? Tense? Asked Michael, trying to remain calm. Becky instinctively hid a little behind his back. The young man approached and carelessly took 2 cigarettes out of Michael's pack. He was wearing a calfskin and no visor. The pungent odor of alcohol hit the captain's nostrils. It was obvious they had been drinking for more than a day. He gave his friend a cigarette, and they smoked with matches. Not from around here themselves? Asked the unpleasant villager. No, Michael said calmly. I grew up here. I've come for a walk around my hometown. I see. Listen, can I give you the whole pack of cigarettes to A? We've been sitting all day without a smoke. Michael was surprised by such an unexpected and impudent request and asked, Can't you buy a pack of cigarettes? The stall around the corner. Imagine, no fate. Stupid laughing is over, comrades. We're out of money. We drank it all. So give me a pack. Hey, buddy, how about I leave you a couple more cigarettes and we'll go? All right. Michael tried to speak neutrally and politely, but the rage inside him was beginning to curdle. You're holding us up. No, let's do it this way, the guy answered him. You give me a bundle for one of your girls and get the fuck out of here. Your girl's prettier. Becky was very scared, instinctively hiding behind Michael's back. He realized that a conflict was brewing, which apparently could not be avoided by peaceful means. Everything happened in a matter of seconds. In a flash, Michael unnoticeably grabbed the bully's hand, holding a knife. Then he made a throw, and he fell flat on the pavement like a rag doll. Michael pulled out the knife and broke his arm. He screamed, "Let go of my arm, asshole." Michael looked at his friend. Do you want to join us? It's not me. I think I'll go, he answered, frightened. And then he ran so that his heels glistened. The other one continued to lie on the pavement. His face was contorted with a grimace of pain. You're wondering, Michael smiled. Yes, go. You answered him that one. Okay. And now he gave him a little pressure on his elbow, and he squealed to the whole village. A couple of people came out of the neighboring houses to see what was going on. The guy suddenly became a baby voice. I surrender, let go of my arm. And the magic word, please, that's not all, Michael said. Apologize to the girl. What do you want me to put more pressure on my hand? No, girl, please apologize to me and my friend. You know him. Michael looked at the frightened Becky. She was nodding machinely, but well said Michael and let go of his adversary. Go on. He kicked him so that he fell into a nearby ditch. The bully stood up helplessly, rubbing his arm and writhing in pain. He glared angrily at Michael and then headed after his friend, who was already a small dot. Somewhere on the horizon, Becky calmed down a bit and looked at Michael with loving eyes. They were silent for a while, looking at each other, and then looked away embarrassed. The man blushed and said, We were going to my grandmother's house. Yeah, let's go, Becky replied. Soon they approached the property. He opened the rusty lock of the gate. Inside everything was overgrown, tall weeds and weeds. The old blue 2-story house was lost in paint, as if it was slightly askew, and looked at them pitifully. Michael and Becky walked down the path to the gazebo. They sat down. He pulled a water bottle out of his backpack and offered Becky one. She thanked him and took a few gladders. Gradually, the summer heat began to kick in, and the moisture blissfully wafted down her beautiful body. Michael took out a cigarette and smoked thoughtfully. A rooster crowed in the distance, a breeze blew, mansions on the property. The man and the girl were silent for a long time. Michael was absorbed in his thoughts. Becky sat and thought that she would like to walk with him all day in the village and in the woods, listening to his interesting stories and laughing at the top of her voice. She hadn't felt this good in a long time. She liked him. Becky was very afraid to admit it to herself, but she could no longer deny the obvious and deceive herself. She liked him, and Alex was somehow pushed to the background. Not even to the background, but to some very distant one. It was as if he had become a complete stranger to her. She didn't want to go to him, but Mike was so dear, so warm, so real. She looked at him with her hand on her cheek. For some reason, she wanted to ask him, "Where did you learn to do that? What don't you understand, Michael?" "You know, the tricks of the trade," Becky said, embarrassed. "I've only seen that in movies before, and here you are." "And this floor," indifferently answered Michael. "And I've been practicing hand-to-hand combat for 6 years." "Wow," the girl exclaimed. "Yes, my father brought me." "You know where the museum is, don't you?" "Of course I do." "Well, there was a school in the basement. I practiced until I was 18 years old. And in the Army," continued the instructor. "I had such a cool, also military, such a stocky man with a bushy mustache and a mixed suit. Uncle Zach was his name. He'd been through Vietnam. He came back from a hot spot and decided to open his own section. He was a cheerful man, kind, but strict. He praised me very much. Others even resented that I was his favorite. I won medals and cups in competitions. At home, my mom still has the whole wall in them." Quietly laughed Michael, and then continued standing there collecting dust. "Why do they have to collect dust right away?" Becky shared. "You tried, fought, won." "Well, yes, perhaps," agreed the man. "Listen, did you visit Uncle Zach when you were at Mom and Dad's?" "Sure, that's a given. I come to see Uncle Vita every time I visit, standard procedure. He taught me a lot, not only in terms of sports, but also in life. A wise man, so very wise. This time I came, I thought we'd do the old scheme in his coach's room. A couple of daisies, and then we'd go back to our old ways. And he told me, 'Mike, I've given up drinking. 2 years ago, I can still pour tea. I quit smoking too, by the way.' Can you imagine, at 55 years old, a man just quit? Good for him. I'd like to quit smoking too. I don't drink very rarely anyway, and never got drunk." Michael summed up, smoking a cigarette and carefully put out the butt on the ground. Then he threw it into a rusty bucket that stood nearby and looked at Becky. Their gazes met again. She took her hand away from her face and put it on the table in the gazebo. Then she said to Michael, "Thank you for protecting me." Looking into her eyes, he touched her hand with his fingers and then placed his palm on it. Becky wanted to pull her hand away, but his palm was so nice, so hot. Michael could feel the girl struggling a little, but then he realized that she felt good when his strong hand touched her. For a while, they looked at each other in silence. A blush began to flood their cheeks. Finally, Michael said softly, "So beautiful. You were made to be protected and cherished at all times." She felt a huge and pleasant wave arising in the center of her body, filling her with heat. Her heart beat more frequently. He lifted her palms, their fingers beginning to intertwine. She didn't resist. "No, you can't do this. You can't do this." Becky thought, "I have a boyfriend. I've been with him for 6 years, and Mike was the first time she'd ever seen him yesterday. But how can I be happy with him? I've never felt as good in 6 years as I did today in one day." And Michael squeezed her soft, lovely fingers tighter and tighter. He wanted her, and he desired her. He longed to wrap his arms around her lovely body. Finally, Becky came to her senses and pulled her hand away from him, slightly embarrassed and blushing. The man's face became new. He turned away and nervously took out a cigarette, although he didn't really feel like smoking. "What on earth am I doing?" he thought. "She has a fiancé, especially he's in the same unit as me. Why am I telling her all this? Why did I bring her here? God, what an idiot am I?" And since we have a bus back to the station, Becky interrupted his musings. There's one at 12 o'clock. He looked at his watch. And you wanted to go to your grandmother's grave. We'll make it. Yeah, the cemetery's not far. Good. Why don't we go then? Let's go. Michael lit a cigarette. They left the gazebo. As he left, he closed the gate and looked at his grandmother's house one last time. Tomorrow it would be sold to another person. His warm memories from his childhood would remain only in his soul. He mentally said a warm goodbye to the house, and they headed towards the cemetery. The village was deserted. Michael noticed that several houses were deserted. Such familiar places seemed so alien to him now. This was the end of a part of his life, of which he had many memories, good memories. He felt as if an invisible artist was erasing the forgotten frames of the movie of his life. He went on and on about his life, that all he could think about was the pleasant touch of her fingers. She was asking him something. They were looking at the countryside. An eggplant rushed past them. A new 9 with the windows down. Music played loudly from them. They walked along the forest on a dusty road and soon found themselves in a cemetery. They walked along the graves for a while and ended up at Grandma Michael's grave. I'll wait for you there, Becky said and walked a little farther away. Okay. Grandpa and Grandma's grave were side by side. Their portraits stared at him silently from the granite stone. Grandpa Michael had died when he was 5 years old. He barely remembered him. His grandmother, on the other hand, had lived a very long time. Michael sat on a bench and thought about nothing. Nearby stood the old man's birch trees. When the warm summer wind blew, it became hot. Becky stood nearby near a monument. The sculpture depicted a weeping angel. The girl looked at it thoughtfully, and Michael approached her at the same time. It's a beautiful sculpture. Yes, agreed the man. Let's go, let's go. As they left the cemetery, they met a watchman who was sweeping up leaves and exchanged dry ones with him. Hello. They walked a little way down the road towards the village when suddenly Becky's phone rang. It was Alex. I'll answer it, she said. Michael agreed with her. Hello? Yeah, I was driving all right. Where? Yeah, I'm in the neighborhood. So you said it was only at 4 o'clock. So I did. All right, I'll be there soon. What's wrong with your voice? Are you drunk again? No, look, she hung up on me. Michael looked at her and she sighed and said, I think you're drunk again. Oh my God, I am so sick of this. I can feel that he's drunk. I can feel it, and he's still lying to me. He just called me now, and it's 11 o'clock. I told him I'd be there at 8 o'clock. Nothing. You made it. You're fine. Do you need any help? Like I'm just there to drive food to his unit and put up with his drunken antics and wait for us to get an apartment that we may never get. God, I'm so tired of all this. Becky covered her face with her hands and cried. Michael was confused for a while. I don't know what to do. Then something nudged him, and he hugged her. Becky clung to him in return and sobbed, her tears stinging his chest. He could feel the pain building up inside her. Michael held her beautiful body in his arms and could smell her beautiful hair. The girl was crying loudly. They stood in the middle of the woods near the road. The man had the feeling that they were some strangers among this lovely and endless nature. Why should I beg for care? Don't I deserve it? The girl read through her tears. Don't I do enough for him? 6 years I'm with this turnover and nothing good. He only drinks and promises. And he'll quit drinking and marry me, and we'll have apartments and children. Yeah, of course, I should have kids by now. All the relatives want grandchildren. The clock is ticking. And this one. With these words, another sobbing fit burst from her chest. Michael held her tighter. His chest was wet with her tears. The girl cried for a while longer, and then her sobs turned to short sobs. Michael had some tissues in his backpack, and he held them out to her. She wiped her red, crying face. I don't know why Michael took one napkin and began to wipe her tears in a fatherly and caring way. Suddenly she took his hand when it was near her cheek. Their gazes met, her eyes glistened and her lips were moist. No longer able to control herself, they merged in a long and passionate kiss. It was a riot of vibrant colors inside a waterfall, emotions of fever coming from the very heart. Becky hugged his huge back and he stroked her waist. His hands moved lower and lower. She didn't mind and clutched to him even tighter. At one point, Becky pulled away from him, and he looked into her eyes and whispered, "Let's go into the woods." She nodded silently. He sat with his back leaning against a tree. She was rolling on top of him. Her lovely head of gorgeous, thick, darkly pantsed hair was on his chest. Becky was beautiful. Michael covered her with a windbreaker that he had in his backpack in case it rained. She felt warm and good with him. She seemed happy. He stroked her chin with his fingers. Once in a while, Becky kissed them lightly. It felt so good for the two of them. They were silent for a very long time, enjoying each other's company. And then the girl laughed lightly, stroked his chest, and said we didn't make the bus at 12 o'clock. We didn't make it. Michael agreed. What time is the next one? I think it's at 14 or 13:30. But what does it matter now? How do you feel about going on duty, Comrade Captain? Said Becky, and they laughed together. How does the song go? Airplanes first. Yes, and the girls after that. Michael finished for her. Well, you can't take a song for granted. I've been stuck with airplanes for 6 years. Kate got divorced, and that was it. You never had anyone else after her? No, just one-off stories that didn't last. There was this one girl. I fell in love with her, started courting her. You know the usual, but she didn't want any of that. She just laughed at me, that's all. Then I had no time for business trips, hotspots. I was making money. And my personal life was kind of wiped out. And then suddenly you. They were silent. Then Michael asked, "Tell me, why did you love your LX?" I don't know exactly, Becky thought. Probably at 16, when he kissed me for the first time. It was some kind of hormonal thing. A crush. Alex told me how he felt all the time. He gave me compliments, flowers, wooed me beautifully. He even wrote poems. Can you imagine? He told me how much he loved me and wanted to have children with me. And he was sure to marry me. But first, the military school, and then this coup for an apartment. I believed him. I waited for him always, because I had to. A woman should wait for a man because he's good. He's a provider. That's the way I was brought up. I studied, he studied. We saw each other once. We rented apartments to live together. I thought we have these feelings forever. And then it became more of a habit or something, You didn't think about leaving him. Michael interrupted her. Becky was silent for a moment, and then she answered, I did, and sometimes I wanted to. Did you? I even tried to leave him. But he'd come back with a huge bouquet of roses, get down on his knees, and say, Becky, love, I'm sorry. I believed again. I thought that this time he would change and everything would be different. But no, it's the same old pattern. Everything goes well for a while. Then it's back to drinking, swearing, blaming me for everything. It's like a merry-go-round. I feel like such a fool now. You're not stupid, Becky. You're not stupid, Michael said, stroking her hair and kissing the top of her head. And then there's my relatives and my mom and my grandmother and my friends' grandmothers all pushing me. Come on, what are you talking about? He drinks. So what? Who doesn't drink nowadays? At least he's not cheating. You have to learn the military on the tape, and then, look, up to major, and maybe even colonel. What prospects and an apartment? Which of the suitors has an apartment now? Go with him, accept it. Nothing. It's just his youthful stupidity that will pass. Be patient. That's it. Mike, be patient. Be patient. Wait. And I'm waiting like a fool and bear with it. Mike, when will you live? To love, when to babysit and take the kids to the garden. Oh, I'm so sick of all this. They were silent, and he stroked her hair. Then the girl continued, and you and I have everything. That's how ashamed I am, Mike. I cheated on my fiancé with you. What will people think when they find out? They'll say I'm some kind of, There'll be rumors all over town. Michael put his palm on her cheek, turned to face her and said, I don't care what anybody thinks, I don't care. Let them think what they want to think. All people have opinions. Nobody forbids them to express their opinions. But you can just not listen to it. Turn it off and do what your heart desires. After these words, they merged again in a long and tender kiss. There was silence. Birds were singing. A cuckoo was heard in the distance. After the kiss, they were silent. And then Becky asked him, "What story am I to you?" "What do you mean?" "But you said you had one-off stories there after your ex-wife. What if I'm a story to you too? Taking me to the country, charming me. What if this is all a cunning plan to seduce me?" "Becky, really?" "No, honestly, I swear to you." "Mike, then what do we do now?" "I got a fiancé. You're in the service with him. In one unit, I'll live in this military town for a month and go to him, and then I'll go to you. I've never had anyone but Alex. I've never had a lover. I don't know what I'm going to do now. Oh, I don't know. Not a slutty woman, I guess. Becky, let's take things as they come. Right now, you and I are going to take the bus. Then you call Alex, get the car, drive separately from me so no one gets suspicious about us. I'll be there later. You can text me tonight and we'll meet. How interesting. I'll be in a show or a movie or inside a book I read as a kid. Secret dates, fiancés, lovers. I never thought I'd go on one of those. And here you were a random hitchhiker, Becky said, and gently slapped his chest with her palm. Let's walk slowly toward the bus. Oh, I don't feel like it, the girl said. I don't feel like it. I'd lie around with you all day long. So good, let's stay here for another 5 minutes. Come on, agreed the man. The bus pulled up, sighing all around him. The clubs where Becky and Mike sat down. Passengers with grim faces looked at them in surprise as if they were foreign elements. Michael held out money to the conductor and she gave him change. The bus bounced on the bumps. Becky stared out the window pensively and it was hot. He could feel the sweat beading on his forehead and his back getting wet. The seat beneath them had already warmed in the sun, now burning his buttocks slightly. How far are we going to go? Becky asked. About 15 minutes, Michael answered. They were silent the rest of the way. They arrived at the train station where they had gotten off the train this morning. The rest of the way, they drove in silence. They arrived at the station where they got off the train this morning. It felt like they had lived a lifetime together in just one morning. The man lit a cigarette. The bus driver approached him and gestured for a lighter. He was a thin man in his 40s. He had a thick black brush mustache sticking out of wrinkles on his face. He was dressed in a brown shirt with stains under and under his arms and black pants. He dryly thanked and stepped aside, and Becky looked at Michael with loving eyes. He was so masculine, so tall, so strong. Her body could still feel it, his strong hands rough and caressing. He was beautiful. Mentally, Becky compared him to her Alex, and the latter was clearly losing on all counts. She didn't want to go to her fiancé's house. She wanted this day to never end. Michael finished his cigarette, and they headed to the locker room to pick up their bags. He slung his green army bag over his shoulder and took Becky's heavy bags in his hands. Can you carry them? The girl asked. Where would I go? The man smiled. They headed towards the cab drivers. Seeing them, an elderly Indian with a characteristic accent shouted, Guys, we need a cab. Where are we going? Let's make the bags nice. He opened the trunk and made an inviting gesture. How can you refuse such a service? Michael thought to himself with a smile. The cab driver helped him to put the bags and then opened the door. Becky got in. Only the girl will ride. I'm not going, Michael said. If you say so, agreed the cab driver. Where to? To the military unit near here, answered Becky from the car. Let's kick it, yeah, said Michael. How much, bro? Special for you. The price is $5. I'm telling you it's a very good deal. You go that way. If you go that way, everybody's going to tell you $7, $8. I'll take the girl like a magic carpet and my mom. I swear. Michael smiled, pulled out his wallet, and gave the driver the bill he needed. After thinking a bit, he added the cabbie and another $1, said, and this is for you for the service. Your brother from the heart. Well, let's go. Wait, a couple minutes, asked Michael. He leaned over to the car window. Becky looked at him. But for now, she said. For now, I'll text you tonight. Okay, be careful. He stepped away from the car and signaled the driver to go. Then he walked a little farther and negotiated with another cab driver. After much haggling, Michael still agreed to ride for $7. The Armenian didn't cheat, Mike thought. It's nice that there are still honest people in our time. Meanwhile, Becky was driving and looking out the window. The Armenian turned out to be chatty. He kept saying something to her, and she rarely answered him, aha, aha. What's wrong with you? She looked at the familiar scenery, but everything seemed foreign to her. Without Michael Becky, she remembered his strong arms, his kind and honest eyes. She wished this day would end soon so she could call or write to him, so she could hear his voice again or feel him near. Listen, the sergeant at the checkpoint told him. Me, Captain Morris. Here's the paperwork. Michael held out his military ID card to him. You should have your orders in there. Take a look. The sergeant looked at the computer and clicked a couple of times, then tapped the keyboard. He looked intently at the monitor and said, yes, there is. Come on in, Captain. The sergeant handed Michael's military ID card back, and then a private shouted in a military manner. A young kid of 18 years old, skinny stubby with glasses, ran up to him. Probably joined the service recently. He set off clumsily and looked at the sergeant over his shoulder. I need to talk. Escort the comrade captain to the officer's barracks. Do you know where it is? Executed exactly. Yes, Comrade Staff Sergeant Michael went through the checkpoint. Soon he went into his room and started ironing his uniform to change and head to the colonel. Becky arrived before he did. She had been told that the chief warrant officer Loud was in the warehouse, and she needed to wait a bit. The sergeant called and reported to the petty officer that his fiancée had arrived. Alex showed up about 10 minutes later. He had a wrinkled look on his face, his soft uniform removed. She hadn't seen him in a couple months, but it appeared he'd changed beyond recognition in that time. His eyes had gotten small and swollen. He put on a couple extra pounds. His potbelly was showing under his uniform. He disgusted her. Becky, my darling, my darling. His clumsy paws rested bulky on her shoulders. He reached for her with his lips, but Becky turned away and planted a kiss on her cheek. He smelled disgusting. Are you drunk again? She said to him instead of greeting him. Becky, darling, in a diluted tongue began the petty officer. What do you mean, drunk again? Well, we had a few drinks with William. That's how much he put his index finger and thumb together in a characteristic gesture. I swear to you, it's the end of the week. My God, it's the end of the week. Come on, Becky. Then he said in a nasty, lustful tone of voice, you will. You will. I haven't seen you in so long. Come on, you and me. Well, he reached out his hands to her again, trying to touch her charms. But Becky coldly and with irritation pushed him away and said today is Wednesday. Alex stared at her, uncomprehending. Slightly, staggered to her feet. Wednesday. Wait, like Wednesday. And I thought, well, Wednesday is a little Friday. Here we go. Come on, your Alex missed you. That's what Becky said out loud. Alex jerked back in surprise. The two soldiers near the checkpoint turned their heads in her direction. Becky noticed this is what she continued, young man. There was a new metallic intonation in her voice, previously uncharacteristic of her. We had a deal that you quit drinking, or at least around me you don't drink, because it disgusts me. It was on me. Look when I'm talking to you. It did or it didn't. It did. Gave in to Alex. So, Becky went on. She felt like someone else was speaking for her. You broke the deal again. I don't like that at all, so I'm leaving now. You're staying here. Call me when you're sober. Also apologize to Becky, not Becky and me. I'm out of here. You can keep drinking with your Daniel. I don't care. Becky turned around and walked with wide steps away from the military unit, leaving the chief warrant officer and the soldiers near the checkpoint in mute indignation. One of them said to the other lad, and she is cooler than our company commander. This one definitely give me a cigarette. The senior warrant officer stood for several minutes, looking at one point and did not understand what had just happened. He was already quite drunk and alcohol began to cover him more and more. Finding his feet, he turned around and headed back towards the checkpoint. Everything in front of his eyes went bad. Out of the corner of his eye, he noticed the soldiers staring at him with smokes and cigarettes. What are you staring at? Angrily asked the petty officer. Is there a problem? Not at all. Comrade Petty Officer. Almost unanimously echoed the soldiers. Look, I loudly headed through the checkpoint towards the warehouse, thinking to take to hell. What's gotten into her? She was always so docile. So what if she had a drink? She didn't know what got into her. All her life she's been a good and obedient girl. And now she's got her fiancé in a scandal outside the army station. Could it be Michael had that effect on her? She thought of him again, and a pleasant warmth spread through her body. The girl smiled, and the bags were no longer so heavy, the sun so hot, and the situation so unpleasant. Everything was suddenly good. Morris looked at himself in the mirror. The uniform had everything laid out all back on his shoulders, 4 stars and stripes. What's a captain's when? How many? Asterisks? 5. Becky's voice echoed in his head. He remembered her smile, her eyes. The gentle voice remembered how good it felt to stroke her body and kiss her lips. How he wished he could see her again. She'd probably really like me in uniform, Michael thought. Then he put on his cap and left the room. It was the first sign of dusk outside. A platoon ran past the barracks in formation. The captain passed the platoon and went to the colonel. Along the way, he met soldiers who stopped, made military greetings, and said Zdravlya, Zdravlya. The captain silently answered them with a nod of the head. When he reached the headquarters, he reported to the secretary that he had arrived at the colonel's office. The secretary knocked on the office and invited him in. Out of the corner of his eye, Michael saw a sign on the door, Colonel Adams. Michael joked to himself about the most appropriate initials for the Russian army. Entering the office, he saw a large, bald Shelkov man, slightly over 50, who was concentrating on his computer and poking at the keyboard with fingers that looked more like Bavarian sausages. Michael stopped near the door, holding his cap in his hand, and said, "Hello, Comrade Colonel." The latter took his eyes off the computer and looked at Morris in surprise, then smiled and shouted good-naturedly, "Zdorovy, Zdorovy, Vidali elephant's petals." Then they both laughed loudly, and the colonel continued, "Mike, my dear, are you?" "I am Comrade Colonel." The colonel started with open arms and walked towards the captain. They embraced, and the colonel kissed him twice, firmly and masculinely on both cheeks, and then began to shake his hand, smiling in 32 teeth on his brow. "And what a wind you got here, motherfucker. Come on, sit down and have a seat." Michael sat down and put his cap on the table. "Squeal, shout for our health." "Thank you, Comrade Colonel, I won't refuse." "But Mike, let's not by the charter." Colonel, got me here Iddish, what an important man," and loud and dispersed. Laughing. "I remember you in training school, you were like this." The colonel showed his little finger and cheeks. Then he retracted his cheeks. His face became like the face of a huge carp, which made Morris even more cheerful. "And now there you are waving like that. Captain, smile. Your shoulders are like that, and look, soon you'll be walking sideways to my office." "Oh, Mike." Colonel Adams reached for the bottle of whiskey in the first drawer of his desk. The captain laughed and smiled. He was very happy to see his good old teacher. The colonel pulled out a large bottle of expensive whiskey. Michael had never seen such a thing. He had. The colonel proudly tapped the bottle with his palm. "From Australia. Recently, he and my daughter came to my birthday party. And he's a guy, a beat it guy." With these words, the colonel raised a finger in the air. "It's not that easy. We'd like to see more of them in the armed forces. Otherwise, it's this junk." The man pointed to his old computer with a large monitor. "But it's just nerves, not work." "All right," he said, and started pouring whiskey. "Come on, dear, to us, to you, and to the Special Forces." Cheers. The officers clinked glasses and put them on the table. Michael felt the whiskey burning his throat. Then a pleasant warmth went down his body with a lemon. Asked the colonel, "Comrade Colonel." "I don't snack after the first one." With these words, they laughed even louder because they remembered a funny incident from their youth. "So, Comrade Captain, you remind me of those times." Smiling, jokingly wagging his finger, told him Adams and is. "All right," thought the colonel, and began to shift a little to a more serious tone. "Think how you and I came to such a remote place. I thought you served somewhere near Moscow. That's right. And then a business trip like a business trip. Really? Asked the colonel, pouring the second one. How are ours? Yes, things are going well. The task set by the leadership is being fulfilled. Difficult. It all happened. I was stuck in that country for 3 years. I didn't even take a vacation. At least you got a bonus, right? Well, thank God. What about here? An order is an order. My grandmother's village is nearby. I never thought I'd have to live here. As they say, God works in mysterious ways. That's for sure. And how are you here, Comrade Colonel? Oh, Mike, I beg your pardon, you've taken possession. Comrade Colonel, you I am for my Semyonovich. Got it, got it? Confused, said Michael. I have nothing special too. That's all. You and I are like ants. Wherever they tell us to go, that's where we go. How about a third? No, Semyonovich, thanks, I don't want to. What do you think? I'll have a drink with your permission. Comrade Captain. And Adams laughed again. Then he poured himself another 50, drank it in one gulp. He wrinkled his nose a little and said, wow, what a drink. 15 years old. Come on, Mike, how do you live? Not married? Kids? The captain was embarrassed. He remembered Becky's hair and her soft lips. He really wanted to hug her. Maybe he should call her after his talk with the colonel. No, Semyonovich didn't get married, Michael sighed. Why not? You're such a guy, handsome. Didn't you have a what's-her-name? The colonel began to snap his fingers, trying to remember the name. Kate helped him Morris. That's right, Kate, white-haired. I was the one who came to see you, the pretty one. I thought you were there with her. Why didn't it work out? Yes, Semyonix sighed. I married her. But as soon as I got married, I got divorced. 6 years I've been single. Betrayed. The colonel asked with understanding. That's right. The colonel shook his fist at the air. Well, time heals. There's no one in sight. No, said Michael, feeling like he was lying. Well, it's a matter of time. I got there okay. Oh, by the way, I met a girl on the road. The captain tried to keep his voice neutral, afraid to reveal his feelings for Becky. Can you imagine? She had to be in the same honor, said that she was on her way to the groom. Is that some kind of soldier? No. Senior warrant officer loudly loud, said Michael, trying to hide his disgust at that name. Do you know him? Sure, I've known him for 6 months. And what can you say about him? What are you interested in? Colonel Michael asked, surprised, and realized that he was about to crack, so he tried to get out of the way. Yeah, I'm just curious. It's a weird coincidence. Wait, you said you're his fiancé. Yeah, he has a wife. Why a fiancé? Michael turned pale. He was ready to fall to the ground in shame. So he slept with a married woman and she cheated on him. An act unworthy of an officer's honor. So Becky lied to him. She was actually married to Alex. And if she was lying, why? Did she really want to cheat on him? Or maybe she wasn't going to see him at all? Questions like angry bees swirled in Morris's head. But the colonel interrupted his thoughts. But yes, he has a wife and 2 children. He told me so himself. It's in his personnel file, too. Mike, why are you looking so pale? Are you okay? Yeah, I'm fine. Out of breath, Michael said. What's his wife's name? Oh, God forbid I remember. I remember Becky. Oh yeah, Becky. The girl on the train was called Becky, too. So much for coining words, Michael said. Well, that's her then. Only why was the bride called that all of a sudden? Decided maybe to remember her youth on her wedding night? Colonel Captain laughed, suddenly felt a burning jealousy in her chest. Strange these women, damn them understand. So, all right. The colonel lightly slammed his palms on the table. Soon the tale will be told. But not soon the service will work out. I'll be sitting here to deal with this Bandera. Adams pointed to the computer, a mountain of orders to sort out. You go get some rest. Check in with the major tomorrow. At 10 o'clock, he will tell you what's going on. Got it? That's right, Michael mumbled, barely moving his lips, but that's it. Good to see you. Good service to you, Comrade Captain. If you need anything, come on in. My doors are always open to you. Captain Morris walked out of headquarters, having a bad dream about sleeping with the chief warrant officer's wife. He thought, that's a hell of a thing to do. But damn it, with a very pretty ensign's wife. What's the difference? If anyone in the unit finds out, it'll be such a scandal. My God, what was I thinking? My head's all fucked up. I was imagining things. I believed her, and the woman just wanted to have fun. Of course, she's got a fallen husband, right? And here I am, a captain, tall, handsome, strong. How could she not sleep with me? Oh, what a fool I was. Michael had dinner and spent the rest of the day in his room. He tried watching a movie on his laptop, but all his thoughts were only of her. Inside was a mixture of feelings of love and bitterness, jealousy, annoyance, shame, and anger at himself. After all, she was going to live in the town for a month. Becky would be traveling to it. Who can find out then what will happen? And how am I supposed to look that guy in the eye now? Maybe he's not an alcoholic at all, but a decent warrant officer. Everything else is just gossip and rumors. The colonel didn't say anything about him, right? Hello, Comrade Petty Officer. I slept with your wife in the woods. How's that? It's like a joke, for God's sake. Michael chased these thoughts in his head, lying on the bed with his hands behind his head. It was already 12 o'clock, but he didn't want to sleep. Tomorrow he would be up at 5. Suddenly, a cell phone registered on the nightstand. It was her. Gathering his strength, he picked up the phone and coldly said hello. Hi. Once again, that gentle voice ripped his heartstring apart. You're awake. No, in a cold, angry tone communicated Michael. How are you? Fine, and you? I've been thinking about you all day. What's wrong with you? You're so tense. You're doing fine. The man was silent for a long time and then asked, Why did you lie to me? What are you talking about? Mike, I sincerely do not understand what you mean. Let's be more specific. Becky was scared. That Miloud is not your fiancé. He's your husband. What Becky marveled at. I told you we're not married. He keeps asking me to marry him, but we never did. You have 2 kids with him. You hid it. Mike, have you been drinking? You don't sound like yourself, talking nonsense about your relationship. Alex, I told you everything as it is, and I was honest and frank with you. You're a mother of 2 children, and you let yourself sleep with another man. You're such a righteous one. The girl lost her temper. Let's say I was even a mother. So what? Let's say I was even a mother. So what? What are you, some kind of saint? You saw a girl younger than yourself. You tried to woo her. Told her touching stories about her grandmother and her childhood. You wooed her. And then I burst into tears. And you, Menotep and Bang, and dragged her into the woods. Isn't that right? The man was silent. In a way, she was right. That's right. And something tells me. Even if I told you I was a mother of 2, it wouldn't stop you. Michael was silent again, and she was right again. Why have you say something? You've lost your tongue. Becky, you're not interested in anything else. No shame, no conscience. Look how interesting you've made me look. And now he's claiming I'm some kind of a dishonest person. You know what, Mike? I thought much better of you. Goodbye. I guess you and I had a one-time thing going on after all. I'm sorry. I was kind of hoping for more than that. Then tears came to the girl's eyes. There was a lump in her throat. God, I'm such an idiot. A month had passed since that conversation, or maybe a year, he didn't know. Everything appeared gray and dull to him. Michael knew that once a week Becky came to see the chief warrant officer. He tried not to cross paths with her, though his heart ached and his soul ached to tell her how he felt. However, he tried to bury them alive, but they inexorably burst from the bowels of his soul and grabbed his heart fiercely. In his chest pinched longing for the rack on the tape flashed days of service, the schedule of the day. Everything by the hour, everything by the minute. Routine sucked him in. But in his spare time he thought of her, remembered that fabulous day they spent together. There were times when he forgot about her, and it was strange to him that he thought about her for hours, but she suddenly became the centrifugal force of his thoughts. His whole being yearned for her. Several times he wanted to call her, talk to her normally, explain everything, maybe try again, or at least part on a good note. But he couldn't. His fingers were already dialing the cherished phone number, but something stopped him at the last moment. It was about the same thing. At first, she was very angry with Mike and could not forgive him. Then she began to long for him. She remembered the day she had spent with him too, and thought it was the most beautiful day she had had in the last 6 years. She wanted to go to him, but her feminine pride prevented her from dialing his phone number. No, she thought, if he was really a decent man and would fall in love with me as I did with him, let him dial me first and apologize. And if he's just another dog, let him go to the woods. There aren't many of them. Well, there aren't many handsome, tall, handsome, nice, with money, with an apartment. A captain, probably a colonel. What rank comes after captain? I'll have to ask Alex. Alex called her 2 days after such an unpleasant incident at the checkpoint. Swore and swore that he would never drink again in his life, except a little bit on holidays. He told her he loved her and had been waiting for her all this time. And Becky believed him again, since she'd known him for 6 years. And Mike was the first time she'd ever seen him. Alex, he's kind of her own person. She consoled herself. Yeah, he drinks, sure. But what man doesn't drink? We should ask him about the apartment. What's the good news? Nothing. He'll take his exams in the fall. He'll go to study to be a lieutenant. And we'll live. But we're in this unit too. Will she have to avoid him? Alex came home from work. He hadn't had a drink in a month. Anyway, Becky didn't smell alcohol on him. She was making him dinner. They would chat about the day and then go to bed. Sometimes they had routine, monotonous, ordinary sex. Like all life after it, Alex would wheeze and Becky would pull the blanket up to her chin and stare at the ceiling. There were times when she would quietly cry herself. I don't know why. Or rather, she did. She didn't like this life. She didn't like it. She didn't like making him food every night. She didn't like everything. She often thought back to when they were in the woods with Michael and compared. He was so soft, so careful, and yet he was skillful at showing his strength. He enjoyed her body and tried to give pleasure to her. Alex, on the other hand, was thinking more about just satisfying his animal interests, and then fall asleep. Lately, she hadn't slept for a long time because she was alone with herself at night, and she liked it. But okay, I'll dump Alex and go to him. We'll be in love for 3 years, and then it'll be the same routine. Everything changed abruptly one day, which was a fireworks display of strange and ridiculous events. Usually, Becky would sit in the apartment studying her books before her husband's service. Sometimes going for a walk to the local park. She was preparing for her final year at the institute. According to estimates, she was going for a red diploma and really didn't want to ruin her reputation. However, she realized that first a student works for credit, and then vice versa. But she decided to be reassured and to prepare for the new academic year in order to be ahead above her classmates. Besides, one of the professors hinted to her about graduate school, which interested her a lot. So she lay peacefully on the couch and read a thick textbook. Periodically, she would underline something with a pencil and text with her girlfriend, and the windows were wide open because it was a hot summer day and she wanted to cool it down a bit. Suddenly, her cell phone rang. An unfamiliar number popped up on the display. Again, probably they will sell me loans. Annoyed, she thought, and picked up the phone. Hello, Becky, asked a male voice. Who is this? Sergeant of the Wells is concerned from the military unit. We have some kind of an emergency related to Senior Warrant Officer Loud, your husband, that is? Could you come over for some clarification? Yeah, Becky's worried. How did you get my number? Captain Morris, and he's in the neighborhood. Can I give him a message? No, not necessary. Coldly, Becky said, at the same time feeling a pleasant exultation inside. Her lower abdomen healed sweetly. I'm on my way. Stand by. In the meantime, there were some very interesting events going on in the unit that required her participation. And it all started with the firing range. Captain Morris was watching through binoculars as the men hit their targets. It was the heat of summer. He could feel a rivulet of sweat dripping from under his cap. The air was filled with shots from Kalashnikov rifles. Morris looked at one platoon. For some reason, there were not enough soldiers in the positions there should be 12 men, but there were only 7. Michael approached the animal and through the noise of gunfire said, "Comrade Lieutenant, I am Comrade Captain. Why do you not have enough men in position? I can't know mages." Suddenly a sergeant ran up to them, and panting Veja voice said, "Comrade Captain, Comrade Lieutenant, permission to report." "Permission granted," replied Morris. "The privates as well as the corporal are still in the ammunition depot." The non-commissioned officer was left in charge. Chief Warrant Officer Loud refused to give us assault rifles. He said that there were no more assault rifles, we were not entitled to any. I told him that everything should be enough, because yesterday you, Comrade Lieutenant, checked everything together with him. And there's an order from Comrade Major to hold a training session at the firing range. So, boldly asked Morris. Comrade Chief Warrant Officer refused to give us the required automatic rifles, closed the ammunition depot, and went in an unknown direction. The lieutenant swore hard. Morris, with a bitter intonation, said, "He who serves in the army does not laugh in the circus. So what do you want to do?" asked the sergeant, the lieutenant, and the captain. They looked at each other. Michael said, "Lieutenant." "Continue with the drill." "Sarge, what's your last name?" "Sergeant Wells." "Comrade Captain." "Got it." "Do you know where the petty officer is? Could it be him?" "He's often at the ensign's place." "Is it in the hangars where we keep the cars?" "Come on, how do we visit him?" "Take me there, Comrade Captain." "Let's go." The captain followed the sergeant. To his left, soldiers were lying down and shooting at targets. After about 10 minutes, they were outside the lightly lit hangar. It was semi-dark inside. The captain and sergeant headed toward the entrance. As the captain approached, he heard laughter and smelled a strong odor of alcohol and tobacco. Even though there was a no smoking sign on hangar's door, "Sarge, there's a place to stay." The captain went inside the angara and started walking along the rows of barrels and crates. He heard the end of the conversation, and I say to him, "What 300 liters of diesel paste do you want?" "Death by Dacha." This was followed by a silly and loud laughter. Going around the corner, the captain saw the following picture. At a simple table with iron legs, preserved from the Soviet times on 2 stools, sat Chief Warrant Officer Loud and Warrant Officer Daniel. On the table was shot newspaper, on which stood 2 bottles of moonshine jar, pickles, sprats, a loaf of black bread, cucumbers, tomatoes, and green onions. The warrant officers' shirts had been reached. They held smoking cigarettes in their hands. The men were heavily intoxicated, though the clock showed only 12. Seeing the captain, Warrant Officer Daniel clumsily put the cigarette in the ashtray, then tried to stand up, but apparently from severe alcohol intoxication fell to the concrete floor, laughing, spreading his legs like a clown in a circus. The ensign loudly turned his head away, and as if not noticing the captain, continued smoking. The captain looked at Petty Officer Loud. Stocky, clean-shaven, with a swollen face and a red nose. His eyes and lips were more like and awkwardly cooked dumplings. Of what she found in him, it was like this. Captain Morris's first impression had never previously crossed paths with him on duty, but now it felt as if he was seeing him in his true guise. Finally, the captain couldn't stand it any longer and yelled Daniel and Loud. "How do you make sense of this?" By this time, Daniel clumsily stood up and, staggering on his feet through his thick gray mustache, said, "Hello, I wish you healthier. We've seen the petals on an elephant." Morris bellowed, "Why are you sitting and drinking moonshine in the middle of the service?" I answer according to the regulations. Comrade Captain Daniel blamed me. "The military enlistment office is to blame," answered Morris. Sit down calmly," Loud said to him loudly. The ensign looked at the captain in confusion, then at his drinking companion, and clumsily sat down. "Comrade Petty Officer, respect the chain of command. I am the senior officer here. Why didn't you stand up and salute according to the regulations?" "Maybe I'm not supposed to." "What did you say?" said Morris. "Well, say it again." "You heard perfectly well." Calmly said loudly Loud and put out his cigarette. Then rolled on the wall and folded his hands on his stomach. "What did you come here for? You're supposed to be at the shooting range, aren't you?" Comrade Chief Warrant Officer, you seem to forget. Hardly containing his rage, said the captain. Yes, it's you who forget everything. I've been in this unit for almost 5 years, and you arrived a month ago. Everything goes through me here, you understand? And you're so sidetracked. Morris's face, beating Loud's thunder, continued to grow insolent. Come on, what are you gonna do to me? You hit me, you'll be out of here like a champagne cork. Nobody's gonna believe you anyway. I got it. I'll believe you. Suddenly there was a voice. Everyone turned around and saw Sergeant Kolosov. He looked bravely at Loud. And I'll believe it, he repeated the sergeant. I told you to wait outside. Why don't you follow orders? Asked Morris. But in his heart he was glad that Loudon had decided to support him. Yes, because it is no longer possible. Comrade Captain started that one. Then there are no machine guns. Then there is a shortage of boots. Then the uniform is the wrong size. I have soldiers complaining all the time. We've been stuck for an hour today. I was proving to him that there are machine guns. I've been on contract in this unit for 2 years. And frankly, I'm getting a little tired of it. You asshole. Loud grabbed an empty bottle of moonshine and wanted to smash its head at the well, remembering the lessons of hand-to-hand combat. Morris hit the elder with the edge of his palm near his wrist, and he instantly dropped the bottle. Then Michael grabbed him by the wrist and took a small step and twisted his arm painfully. Let go of my hand, you bastard, shouted Graham and, kneeling down. Handle by the book, Morris bellowed at him. The sergeant at arms was startled by what he saw and flinched. The captain did it in a second. For a while, they didn't even realize what had happened. But Loud, in spite of the pain, remained stubbornly silent. Morris pressed harder on his hand and said, did not change his mind to address the statute in a machine voice, loudly repeated the captain. Petty Officer wheezed. His face became new eyes glistened with tears of pain. For a while he was still screaming, then began to gather the necessary thoughts and said, Comrade Captain, my fault, let go of my hand. Please, it hurts. Morris let go of his hands. Loud fell to the floor and grabbed his wrist. He resembled a wounded bear. Morris adjusted his cap, then looked over his left shoulder at Daniel and said, Comrade Warrant Officer, I am Comrade Captain. So we're gonna clean up the warehouse, clean up the liquor, throw out the liquor. Do you understand? Yes, Comrade Captain. Permission to proceed. Permission granted. Then he wanted to give an order to the man who was still writhing on the floor in pain, but he was interrupted by a voice from outside. Comrade Petty Officer, Comrade Petty Officer. Then everyone listened to the sound of footsteps, and a soldier Comrade Petty Officer walked in. Oh, he saw Loud on the floor and was surprised. Quickly he looked around at the participants of the scene. Suddenly he saw the captain standing at attention and said, Zdorovia, Comrade Captain, we've seen your health. As a private reports, I was looking for Comrade Petty Officer. There is some citizen at the checkpoint with 2 small children, she says. His wife. Becky thought Michael, and his heart beat faster. He became agitated, but tried to look calm on the outside and answered the private. You said there are no visits now. Yes, Comrade Captain told her, and me and the sergeant. But she stands her ground, he says. She hasn't been in touch for 2 years. She already thought he was dead or missing. She came and asked loudly if he served in this unit. And we didn't say anything. So she showed us photos of the joint, he says. My husband. I've been looking for him for 2 years, at least for 10 minutes. Bring him to me to make sure he's alive and well. And then I'll come when I can. Comrade Sergeant, I gave the okay, so I'm here. Playdate Michael, a popular personality, said the captain, leaning over him. Let's go to the checkpoint to sort things out. Or do you need to be taken by the handle? No way. Comrade Captain Pard, the petty officer, answered him. I'll walk myself. Well, that's good, replied the captain of the Wells. I'm going back. Take the men, go to the firing range. Will you swap assault rifles with someone? Tell the lieutenant I ordered it and there is. Come on, petty officer, let's see what you've got there. What are the secrets of the Madrid court? In the Russian army, Morris came out of the checkpoint and saw a woman standing nearby. She had a white shawl on her head. She looked about 30 years old. She wore a simple black dress. She had a full build. Sneaky disgusting. A second chin spread out. She resembled a chicken on a net that had been suddenly kicked off the farm, and that one now wandered clumsily through the woods. By the hand. The woman was holding a little girl who was picking her nose thoughtfully, and next to her a boy was running merrily kicking pebbles. Hey, don't run. Who did I tell? Morris headed toward the woman. At that time a door opened behind him, and out came Loud. His gaze met the woman's eyes, and she leaned over to the girl and said, "Nancy, sunshine, stay here, okay? Now Mommy and Daddy will talk. That's a clever girl, don't run on the road." The woman swaggered and gait went to the petty officer, as if not noticing the captain on the way. Then she started a scandal. "What about you, Betty? Well, look at you, you showed up. We haven't forgotten. Bread and salt to you, Comrade Chief Warrant Officer." The woman made a comical and grotesque bow. "Where have you been? Cattle? Why didn't you send money to the kids? Who promised to pay the rent? I thought you'd been killed in a hot spot somewhere. And here he is, sitting in the middle of nowhere and not a care in the world. Excuse me, citizen." Morris turned to her. "Who are you?" Someone tiredly, she exclaimed. "Wife, I'm the Wonder in Feathers. May I see your papers? For God's sake. Here's your passport, it's stamped. Here's his marriage certificate, his children's birth certificates. Twins Christina and Nancy. Here are the photos. Christina, why are you putting that dirty stick in your mouth? I'll be right back." Morris looked at Loud, who from shame became like a ghost from drinking it staggered. Then the captain began to look at the documents. Right. Marriage certificate. He said to himself, Becky and Loud Alex. So the children were like a bucket of cold water poured on the captain, as if in the distance. He could hear Becky scolding Loud, and the latter clumsily making excuses. And then the conversation with Izvesky on the phone from a month ago popped into his head. The puzzle came together. He realized, well, the hell with Loud. Becky, yes. Morris walked over and handed her the file folder. "You know, there's someone you might be interested in meeting." "Who's that?" The woman was surprised. "And you will see," said the captain and went to the checkpoint. No sooner had he handed the phone number to the sergeant than the bell rang. "CHCK Sergeant here. Yes, Comrade Colonel." "Comrade Captain, is this you?" "Mike, yes, and fly to me now," said Adams on the other end of the wire. "Yes, Comrade Colonel." Adams looked thoughtfully out the window and smoked a cigarette. There was a knock at the door. "It's open," he said. "Called, Comrade Colonel called, said the colonel. He went to the table and shook out the ashtray. Then he unceremoniously began gradually raising his voice. "Mike, what kind of a circus with horses have you arranged here today?" "Eh? What are you talking about?" "Comrade Colonel, making an innocent look," clarified Morris. "So you don't make a fool of me, Mike. Manual abuse in the relations of junior ranks is a criminal case." Adams began to point his finger threateningly at Morris. Michael turned pale, then asked, "How did you find out?" "Mike, you've been in the Army for years. In one corner. Everyone here knows everything. Daniel must have snitched," thought Morris. "You're just standing there with your mouth watering. I got a test coming up, you know. And you're pulling these tricks on me." "A test. If they find out about your tricks," loud the general, "and our whole unit. The generals will tear our whole unit apart. We'll be glad we're still lieutenants instead of privates. Comrade Colonel, let me tell you how it was." "Go ahead. Just sit down, or there's no truth in your legs." Michael told the whole story with the petty officer about the shortage of machine guns, about the drunkenness in the hangar, about the complaints from Sergeant Kolosov, about the fact that about that woman with children, who showed up at the unit, turned out to be his wife. The program Loud hid from her for 2 years. About the fiancé he had cheated and deceived all that time. The colonel, continuously smoking one after another, filling the ashtray with barrels. When the captain had finished, he nodded his head, sighed heavily, was silent, and then said, "It is clear that the case is dark, but this text is Loud. What to do with it? You are the captain now. You should drive him away, Comrade Colonel. I suspect he sold those machine guns in the first place. And this is a criminal case. The colonel stretched out. Oh, God has sent me trouble with this Loud. I should deal with him. Where did the 5 machine guns from the unit go? I can't know, Comrade Colonel. But a petty officer might. Yeah. After a little thought, the colonel pressed a button on the desk. Sergeyev, I'm Comrade Colonel. Petty officer, I have a fly. After a while, there was a knock at the door. Before that, the captain and the colonel had been waiting for him in silence. Openly said the colonel. Called Comrade Colonel, said loudly, Loud, stand at attention. He had already managed to sober up. His face was pale and tired. The petty officer cast an angry glance at the captain. He was staring out of the window, as if he did not notice anything. I'll tell you what you've been doing, Colonel. There have been complaints about you for a long time, and today you have arranged for me a blue light to Cunning, pounding that machine guns from the part of the aunt. Then bickering some woman arranges a scandals, intrigues, investigations at the checkpoint. This is a military unit here, not a brothel. But the petty officer started to justify himself. Ninok, the colonel said to me and banged his fist on the table. You'll be your wife, I finally realized, which is in my unit now, and she's making a mess of it. So the colonel christened the fingers of his hands. Today you write an application for transfer to another unit at your own will. And in 2 days, don't let your spirit be here or I'll show your mom's mom to you. That's clear. Yes, Comrade Colonel. Well, that's good. Okay, Morris, get out. I'm gonna talk to him about why the hell David Copperfield is in our unit. The machine guns are disappearing. What the hell kind of trick is that? Sat down fast. Morris went to the exit of the office and said, Honor, let's see you tomorrow. The captain walked out, closing the door behind him, and then left the evening headquarters building. He walked slowly towards the mess hall. He wanted to get some refreshment, just in time for dinner soon. Well, that one had progressed. When Becky arrived at the military unit, at first there was a feeling that it was all some kind of a bad dream, as if the events were not happening to her, and you could pinch yourself on the arm and wake up. Becky saw some fat woman who was waving her arms at the children who were running around playing soldiers, and Alex, who just looked pathetic. At that moment, she realized that she was seeing him for the last time in her life. To her, he looked like a nasty grave in the forest. Loud was awkwardly waving his arms and trying to prove something to the woman. Becky approached them. Alex, what's going on here? She asked the woman in a glassy voice. Who is this woman? Nasty teased her father and then turned to Alex. You asshole. You found someone younger. Well, I was changing the kids' diapers. Oh, look at her. She looked at Becky with appraising eyes. Just like Varvara, the beautiful long braid. Bob. Woman, what do you think you're doing? Coldly, Becky replied. What do you think you're doing? How dare you take your husband away from your family? I stole your husband. Becky asked in surprise, letting out a nervous laugh and pointing her hand at herself. Tears appeared in her eyes. I think she was beginning to realize the extent of the deception. Yeah, well, you can read. Here, look, the woman said, holding the marriage certificate almost under her nose. Becky took the documents, her lips moving soundlessly. Becky and Loud. No, it couldn't be, Becky thought, and then handed the papers back. She looked at Alex. It felt like powerful laser beams were about to shoot out of her eyes and saw him. Alex, how could you? Becky began in a trembling voice. How could I, dearie? And I'll tell you how I could. Very simple, Becky answered her. Came to our town on a business trip at the Soldier's Exit Button variant. Well, that's the whole story. Why don't you say something? He's walking all over the place. Hands at his sides, met me, frowned at me. I frowned at him. Doesn't it bother you that I'm almost 10 years older than you? And women are like fine wine. It gets better and better as the years go by. Before his Anna Becky felt everything in her chest split into small pieces. Well then, Becky continued. The second time he came, he got me pregnant. I gave him twins. There's kids running around. Christina and Nancy were giving him an apartment. So he asked for an apartment in our town. So we started living there with the kids. He came to visit us sometimes. Becky felt as if she was falling into the working sand, and the woman went on, and then he disappeared for 2 years. Never heard a word from him. And I thought, God, it's not like the military. Maybe they sent him to a hot spot. Maybe he died or something. But no. Aunt Vejat is sitting here quietly, peacefully, so that she can't knit and can't stand on her feet. And his wife and children are struggling and paying rent, buying groceries, shoes, and clothes for the kids. What are you looking at? You're looking at me, you miserable dog. She looked at Alex. Who's going to give the kids money? And I work from morning till night. My mom takes care of Nancy and Christina. She's old and her legs are bad. This boar is healthy, but in the woods he hid under a bush. It's not our business to give birth. Then that's the way it is with you, bastard, TDC answer. My whole soul has not been spoiled by this life. For a while, all three were silent. Becky crossed her arms and looked away. The woman stared at the petty officer, and he froze like a stumbling block, lowering his eyes to the floor as if he were a guilty child. And what did he do to you, dearie? The woman turned to Becky. What about you, though? Becky waved her hand. You're as clear as the day of God. He met you? He fell in love. He forgot about his wife and children and disappeared for 2 years. And here he was courting you. That's how it was. No, coldly, Becky answered. Do you misunderstand? It hurts me as much as it hurts you. How am I supposed to understand? Asked Becky, starting to boil. What are you going to tell me, chicken? I need to understand. How can you not? What are you, Betty, a chicken? You got it all wrong. She teased Becky. Tell me how I'm supposed to understand, because you're so smart. You know what? Becky said calmly, barely holding back tears. Her lips were trembling. She glanced briefly at Alex and then at his wife. And I'm not going to explain anything to you, Becky exclaimed loudly. Her voice quivered. Then 2 rivulets of tears synchronously flowed from her eyes down her cheeks. I don't have to do this, Becky said through her sobs. You're nobody to me. And you and Alex are nothing to me now either. I loved you, I trusted you all these years, and you. She paused a little to hold back the tsunami and the tears, then tried to say as coldly as possible, I'm going to get all my things today. I'll go home tomorrow, get a ticket for the next train. You'll never see me again. Deal with your wife. Don't come home. Otherwise, I'll call the police. Goodbye. With these words, the girl turned around and headed away from the military unit towards the bus stop. Sobs slammed into her face and tore at her chest. On the bus, the passengers looked at her sympathetically. One woman sitting next to her even patted her on the shoulder and said, Nothing, honey, nothing, everything will work out. You're young, you'll meet someone else. Yes, I already have, Becky thought, and remembered Michael, how she wished she could be in his arms right now. He was so safe and so good. She had even forgotten that he had accused her of lying. When she got home, Becky fell on the bed like a bauble, sobbing harshly and loudly. She didn't remember how long she roared. Her entire pillow was wet with tears. She must have sobbed so loudly that the neighbors heard. She had never been so ashamed. Becky felt small, worthless, unwanted, and deceived. For so many years he'd lied to her, hid an entire family and children from her. She had waited so long for this apartment, and he had been given it a long time ago. He gave it away so easily to some woman who got him pregnant. Yeah, a woman with kids needs an apartment more than a woman with kids. It doesn't matter that he's been with her since high school. It was starting to get dark. Becky pulled her tear-stained face away from the pillow and looked out the window. The sun was leaning toward dusk. The girl headed to the bathroom and took a hot shower. She felt better in her head and felt cleaner and clearer. She got out a white towel and washed her face with water, then put cream on her legs. We have to get train tickets and get out of here right away, she thought. There might not even be tickets anymore. The girl came out of the bathroom with a towel and wet hair. Becky resembled an ancient Greek goddess, who for some unknown reason suddenly found herself in this apartment. She opened her laptop and started looking at train tickets. There were 2 seats left on the 2114. Becky quickly paid for the ticket. So great. Now she needed to dry her hair and could pack. Suddenly the phone rang. Naturally, Becky wasn't expecting anyone. The bastard must have come in a heartbeat, Becky thought. He'll be on his knees apologizing to me again. Well, I'll give him a good one. With that thought, Becky went to the front door and coldly asked who was there. Then she looked through the peephole, and aghast in the sphere of space and eyes stood Michael. He was in military uniform with a large bouquet of roses and a gift bag. "Becky, it was me," he said. The girl leaned sweetly with her back against the door. Her heart beat faster. A woman's pride for some reason blurted out, "Go away," though her heart whispered, "Stay with me all night." "Becky, listen to me," Michael said. "I was wrong." "Forgive me," the colonel said. "I thought you were what are you?" "Oh, why is everything so hard to say?" Michael signed in. Becky looked at him through the peephole and smiled. "Becky, can you hear me?" Becky sighed, "Man, I can't live normally while you're not with me. I don't sleep well. I think about you all the time." The woman's heart raced. "I'm sorry I accused you, I'm sorry." There was silence for a while. Then Becky said, "Go on. I'm here with flowers. Champagne and candy, even a pineapple," Michael said, embarrassed. "You don't mind if, in fact, I want to sit with you tonight. Let's drink champagne and talk quietly. I've missed you. You don't know how much." She felt everything inside her melt. She missed you too. For a moment, the incident with Loud really did seem like a bad dream that had happened somewhere out there a long time ago. But reality is here, and in it, there is Mike so handsome in military uniform, and with flowers the girl was about to open the door for him, but then suddenly remembered that she is still only busy on the towel. And her hair is wet. It's not good to meet him like that. He's so handsome. Becky opened the door for him with a quick whiff of the bathtub. The man saw only her pretty leg. The girl closed herself in the bathroom and shouted from their mic, "Come in, don't be shy. Just close the door 2 turns. Come into the living room. I wasn't expecting you. I'm from the bathroom. I just need to dry my hair and tidy up a little." Michael walked slowly into the hallway. He found a vase, poured water, and put the bouquet in. Then put the candy and put the champagne away in the refrigerator, pulled out at us. He looked kind of clumsy against the backdrop of this apartment, set down 2 flutes, and waited for the one he'd probably been waiting for his whole life. Becky had her hair done and then ran to her room and began frantically rummaging through her closet, looking for the best lingerie. Then found a red dress that she hadn't wanted to take at all when she first went, because she thought she wouldn't need it at all. Well, she did. It's working out, Becky thought and smiled. What's life like? Sometimes an amazing thing, and sometimes looking like a madhouse sneeze. Enter herself the girl. One fiancé disappeared and the second one immediately showed up. Becky looked at herself in the mirror. She was enchanted by the dress. Incredibly, it suited her and brightly emphasized her beautiful forms. The girl played with her hair and said to herself, "Goddess," and went into the room. When Michael saw her, he opened his mouth in amazement. He got up from the couch, looked at her. Becky looked at him from under her lowered eyelashes in embarrassment. "How do I look?" she asked. "No words. You look great," Michael answered in a half-whisper. "But I'm glad," flirtatiously replied Becky. She walked over to the sofa, swayed her hips, and sat next to him, putting her lovely arm on the back of the sofa and put her leg over his leg. The girl looked languidly into Michael's eyes. Her eyes glistened, and the captain's heart was ready to leap out of his chest. "Dear Captain," she said, running her finger across his chest. "A drink and champagne, of course," fussed Michael. He went to the kitchen, got a bottle, came back into the living room with a puff of smoke and a light pop. He opened the champagne and poured it into a flute. Leaving a little foam on top, they took the glasses. And Becky asked, "What are we drinking to?" "Becky, my dear," Michael began to say, "I know you don't have much time, and neither do you. But I think about you all the time. You're very beautiful, you're kind, you're understanding. And you listen to me very attentively, without interrupting. I've never met a woman who lets me say everything that's on my mind. It's a pleasure. but I bent my pretty head and smiled. Those words sort of flowed down my body nerves. And Michael continued, "You said it was probably a one-time thing for me. Well, it wasn't. I fell in love with you the moment I saw you. I'm ready to be with you for a very long time. Maybe into my old age if you want me to. I swear to you on my honor as an officer, you're dear to me." That's all I wanted to say. Without waiting for the end of the sentence, she kissed him tenderly on the lips. Michael put his arms around her. The kiss lasted for several minutes. Then Becky stopped, looked at Michael, and carried a glass to the lovely boy. "What a wonderful toast," she whispered and took a sip. They sat down on the couch and began to chat. Becky and Mike laughed a lot and hugged each other. And I imagine, Michael told the colonel, I was told, but it all came together in my head. And then it turned out the couple was laughing. Turns out that one was laughing too. And I was a fool, I didn't even think to look at his personnel file. 10 years of service. So I'm like this, I get to the unit. And the sergeant from the checkpoint called me. And there stands this, said Becky, depicting without uniform contours of a woman. This creature is there looking at him, yelling something at him. Becky interrupted because she got very funny, and she and Michael laughed. Becky continued before spilling it. "Man, I cried in there. And now I'm laughing, and I can't stop." Her cheeks were flushed. Champagne hit my head, and Polkin calls me and Mike, "What are you doing?" And that loud. Michael did a very funny impersonation of Adams, and Becky laughed even more. "It's such a madhouse." Becky said, stretching her words, "I never thought life could be like this. Crying in the morning, laughing in the evening. Oh, that's it. A major thing figured out in one day. It would be nice if it was just a gradual cover-up. But like in detective stories, you see the clues, there's all sorts of suspicions. And there's no bread. In one day, it's all on a plate. What did you say about him? The machine guns are missing." "Yeah, and the machine guns, and the drinking, and the wife and kids from out of town for whom he got an apartment. It's more like a reality show, to be honest." "I agree," Michael nodded. "He's signing an application for a transfer to another unit, like at his own request. Adams ordered it. I don't know what they decided with the machine guns. Yeah, it's important." Becky brushed it off, taking a sip of champagne. "Let him go to the woods. God, I'm so glad this is finally over. Not the way a relationship should end, not with all the ugliness and circus, but it's over." Michael summed it up. "Yes, it's over," Becky repeated. And then she said with big eyes, "And new ones have begun. Shall we have a drink?" said Michael. After a while, he asked Becky, "I was wondering what you thought of me. When I called you and told you that you cheated on me." Becky gathered her thoughts and said, "At first I was very angry with you, and then I tried to forget you, but it didn't work. Then I persuaded myself that I had to build a life with Alex. It's okay that he will stop drinking and everything will change." But she said from the hobbling, "I thought about you every day." I also gently said, Michael, taking her hand, "I really wanted you to call me constantly on the phone looking. But I wouldn't pick up the phone first, of course. I should be properly offended, but then I'd probably listen to you. And I've been meaning to call you." Michael exclaimed, "Why didn't you?" Becky asked jokingly, shoving him in the shoulder. "I thought you wouldn't want to hear from me. And when you came here with flowers, what did you think? Victory or death? What do you mean?" "Well, it was simple. Either you let me in or you don't. Or you'd already gone back. I thought of all the possible scenarios. There was the scenario where you call for flowers and slap me in the face with them. Seriously. Even that happened when Becky was giggling. Even that happened." Michael repeated. The radio played nice, slow music in the background. "Captain, ask your lady to dance," Becky jokingly commanded. "There was comical," Michael replied. He put his arm around her waist. She put her hands on his shoulders, gazing into his eyes. They moved slowly, ever so slightly swaying. Suddenly, Michael asked, "Becky, will you marry me?" Of course, she smiled and pressed her whole body against him.
Subscribe and click the bell. If we compare Nancy's childhood with the way most of her peers grow up, We can say that the girl was lucky. She studied in England, graduating from a boarding school for girls. It was a first-class institution. Compulsory and elective subjects, sports and excursions, beautiful surroundings and beautiful uniforms. How did Nancy get there? Her father worked in a division of a Russian bank, a prominent position. Nancy's mom had a vocation as a housewife. She couldn't imagine anything else worth doing as a woman in this life. Perhaps she should have been born in the Orient, and some sheikh there would have carried her in his arms, for she was beautiful, delicately charming, and her home was a world she did not want to leave. All those homemade napkins, plates, and pads were infinitely important to her. She could spend hours searching online stores for something that would make the apartment even cozier. Her father didn't come far for dinner, but every dinner turned into a feast. Some meals took Molly hours to prepare. And all that china, tablecloths, wine, expensive glasses created the ambience, so to speak. But when Nancy was at home, she felt older than that. The girl's mother so helpless outside these walls. May beautiful hair, silk dress, and jewelry may not take her eyes off her, but if this well-groomed house cat had found herself on the streets, would she have survived there? Nancy, thanks to her friends, teachers, and herself first of all, understood today's day much better. She had passed her driver's license early. She was going to graduate high school and live apart from her parents. But then disaster struck and her plans changed abruptly. Actually, disaster is a bit of a mouthful. There were changes at the bank, downsizing, and her father was fired. But for him, who didn't expect it, the sky fell to the ground. For Mom, of course. She also explained later in a whisper to Nancy, as if Dad could hear from the back room. But Molly's mom was terribly afraid of traumatizing his psyche. She explained that there was a great grief in the family, that her father still had some big money that he had to pay back. And at a time like this, everyone needs to be together, because there is no one to support the father. They are going back to Russia, and now the father will work there. Nancy did not remember her homeland. She only realized that her life would change completely. Maybe if she had been older, she would have borne it harder. But youth is greedy for impressions, and Nancy didn't mind seeing the world. It was a shame to part with her friends, but she thought she'd go to a school like this one back in her hometown. Yeah, now things had changed more than she could have imagined. Finding herself in an ordinary Russian school, Nancy felt like an alien. The first time it was so hard for her that in the evenings, shutting herself in her room, she cried, something she had long since gotten used to. Only when she was very small had she shed tears like that. After Nancy, evaluating her, in general, not bad class and girls not at all mean, moderately mocking them, and up to passionately curious, and boys who clumsily tried to woo the English girl who spoke with an accent. And most of all the teacher of Russian language and literature, for whom they did not come up with a better banal definition of a teacher from God. But that's what everyone called her. She loved both her subject and her children selflessly. In short, after a while everything at Nancy's was back to normal. Not like at home. They returned to the very apartment from which they had left for England, and Molly, looking around confusedly, the dwelling seemed to her unusually uncozy and cramped. And there was still all the stuff they'd brought with them. Molly realized that there was nothing new to buy. Her husband didn't work for a while. Later he took a low-level job in banking again. The neighborhood, all young people, and he started drinking, and in a way he remembered his past faster than his wife, and realized that expensive cognacs and the like were no longer for him. After all, if you drink every day and not just occasionally, you will spend a fortune on elite drinks. And where to get it? Hot drinks were required every day. And if there was nothing at home, it was a dead evening. Dad figured it out real quick. Maybe he had a family history of alcoholics. Molly, on the other hand, was genuinely lost. She bought seemingly familiar groceries, but maybe he gave her only nothing for the household. And money that should have been stretched over a week was gone in a day. Instead of promising that things would get better, my husband said to cook something simple, like dumplings. You should have seen the sight. When in the evening at dinner my father sits at the table, there is an honorable bottle of vodka, and my mother comes in with that confused smile, which is now as if glued to her face, and puts on the table a soup full of steaming dumplings. She made them herself, yes, from 3 kinds of meat. But from her point of view, she has absolutely nothing to eat herself, because those salads and those fruits, which are useful for beauty, are now relegated to the realm of legend. Mom had to master oatmeal and apples bought from grandmothers at the market. But what tormented her even more was that before she had lived in name, her husband was everything to her. Now there seemed to be no one to talk to. Alex came, ate and slept, and fell asleep early before 10 o'clock, and at night he was tormented by insomnia. He would shuttle to the kitchen and back, looking for pills for his head, and then pour himself a shot again, because he couldn't sleep. And they you rush, you won't be able to work, he explained to his wife. When she shrank to the left, exactly sick asked him maybe enough. In the morning, the father got up, detached and aged, put on the main shirt, which Molly served, shaking hands to tie his tie. At the bank, he was already careful not to show it to customers. Nancy missed the moment when her parents decided to separate. They never fought in front of her. Her mother felt that her daughter should not be psychologically traumatized. Nancy was appealing to a new world for herself, and the final exams were ahead. Clara practiced with her additionally at her home, and did not charge a penny for it. In that sense, she was a fossilized element. But the biggest shock Nancy had to endure was when the last exam was passed, and quite decently. It seemed to the girl that now she was going to have a series of holidays. There would be some kind of present for successful completion of school. Then the birthday of 18 years. Then she and the girls will apply to the university. And then Dad and Mom call her into Dad's office, close the door behind them. Daddy doesn't look like himself. In the time they've been back from England, he's aged 20 years. Mommy doesn't look like herself either. She's as beautiful, gentle, and well-groomed as a house cat. But there's a nervousness about her. He twirls the pen, then puts it away, then picks it up again and starts twirling it. "We want you to get married in a month," Mom said. And again, please. It was so wild and impossible that Nancy asked, "And if you could, spell it again." "The thing is, I'm getting married soon too," Mom said. Nancy didn't know what to do. Clear her ears, support her dropping jaw, cover her face with her hands. Mom explained. She had met a man. Or rather, a man had met her. Mom always took the second role. She didn't say, "I've always met a man." I was introduced, beckoned, proposed to, charmed. Nancy thought once again that in the East she would not have been valued. So Mama was met and charmed to the point of madness by her. So she was getting married. Mama didn't add, and Nancy didn't ask. She just assumed Mama would have a life like before, or maybe even better. Sailing caviar, silver roots. In short, the family was breaking up, and Nancy urgently needed a place to go, to shelter her daughter in a safe harbor. "Mom, this is the 20th century." Nancy was so stunned that she almost forgot the Russian words. She wanted to switch to English. "I'm going to college. I'm moving to a dorm or an apartment with girls, and I'm going to visit my dad. Your boyfriend, as I understand, does not want to see me." Mom patiently sighed and shook her beautiful lips. Then she explained she had pulled up all her connections, kin to 3 generations, grandniece, great-niece, great-nephew, stepdaughters. But she'd found an absolutely marvelous match. 39 years old, single, rich, already seen Nancy's picture and invited to dinner on Sunday. Nancy thought that if Daddy drank, then Mommy must have been into drugs, and not exactly light, maybe even heavy. An overdose. "You'll be home on Sunday." Mom folded her arms across her chest, thin white fingers, manicure, stylish rings. Nancy was going on a bike ride with the girls this weekend. Now the plans seemed to be shutting down. Of course, it was possible to run away from the apartment unnoticed in the morning and rush to the girls and ride all ready from them. But suddenly the weather turned bad, as if it were at the same time with Mom. And on Saturday my father's blood pressure went up, and to leave him to listen to my mother's lamentations, if she ran away. Anyway, the girl stayed. And as in the good old days, she and her mother prepared Sunday dinner and set the oval table with the finest embroidered tablecloth, and laid out the dishes according to the rules. And when the bell rang and her mother threw her daughter out to open the door, Nancy realized to hell with the bicycle, to hell with the girls, and the institution, for that matter, because the Michael her mom had chosen was only ironically a high-end furniture salesman. He should have been starring in blockbuster movies or gracing the covers of men's magazines. Or Nancy shook his head, once again replacing the English vocabulary in it with Russian. And he was not only handsome, but also charming and smart. In short, Nancy didn't even marry with a whistle. It was a sort of teleportation. Today she is a schoolgirl, teaching graphing functions and sleeping under her favorite climate plate. Tomorrow she's a young wife in her own home. Nancy ordered prints of her wedding photos, framed them and hung them on the walls so she could look at them 100 times a day and remind herself that it wasn't all a dream. She didn't turn out anywhere near the kind of hostess my mom did, but she didn't need to be. Michael didn't demand a fine table or an impeccably put-together house, but he loved to travel, and they often went somewhere, mostly abroad, to Europe. That's where Nancy's language test came in handy. Michael's command of English was much worse, but still decent. True, their trips were not purely recreational. Business, you know. Suppliers of wood compote. Try saying that name. Maybe it's the only one on the planet that grows the headsets that belong in a palace, not in the homes of mere mortals. Michael was in love with his work, sensing that he could get some rarity. He could go anywhere and anytime, even to the end of the world. There were times when her husband was away on business all day, but Nancy was never bored. They always stayed in hotels that were miniature cities. They had everything in them, and new acquaintances happened every time by themselves. And how many young women did Nancy envy when Michael was around? More than once or twice. The women would try to recall the wrinkles, the forehead. I think I saw him in some movie. He wasn't a musician, or maybe a singer. How many countries did they travel to? How many things did they see? Nancy grinned. And then, if it hadn't been for Cindy investigator Cindy Jabrailova, she wouldn't have been able to glue her life together from the shards. Yeah, that's too bad. What's broken will never be whole again. But this damn survival instinct makes you collect these shards. Try them on each other. Try to attach them. Glue them, realizing that just one easy movement is enough to cost fate. As they say, a little finger to move. Cindy knows that now Nancy has a different name, different paperwork. What made her turn a blind eye? The parents don't know where Nancy is now. All they know is that she's alive. Mom, drowning in her new happy life, diving headfirst into it, and even with her hair up high, is content with that too. Father has drunk himself completely to death. Sometimes Nancy calls him to say I'm doing well. And Camille, Nancy's daughter, is 12 years old, but she's got a lot of self-importance. She's 16 too. Will you even come to my funeral? Dad asks, like, jokingly. But they both know he doesn't have long to live. My liver's gone to hell. I wish I had that much to drink. What if I ask you the same question? Nancy holds his breath. You don't say anything. It's scary to imagine such a thing. So do I. What are you comparing? Generational change is natural. Fuck you with those words. Nancy hangs up the phone. But Dad realizes it's the snowiest thing in the world. I love you. After leaving the phone booth, Nancy walks into a bar. On principle, she can't afford to spend too much. But not now. She orders a cognac, a double shot, refuses the lemon, peanuts, and other nonsense the bartender offers. She will drink, sitting at the nearly empty bar in the darkest corner. The waiter will come over to light a candle on the table, but she will make the gesture don't, and he'll leave her alone. Maybe they'll stay in this town for a while, as long as no one sniffs about them. The daughter even liked the apartment. What are they renting on quiet old street? There's a bakery on the first floor. You can get a cup of coffee there in the morning. And at nights the female sleeps soundly and doesn't see the cockroaches that scurry across the kitchen floor, not ineradicable. Nancy has experienced everything and almost gives up. Evelyn will leave for school in the morning, and Nancy will open her laptop and sit down to work, and maybe pour themselves another shot of cognac. Heredity, good sirs, and life in the realm of horror, and the glass is already empty. Michael did a lot of charity work. It's a badge of honor among the well-to-do. Some may have felt sorry for the money, but didn't want to be judged by others. And for some, it became a need. Michael chose a children's rehabilitation center. It was something between a boarding school and an orphanage. It's where the kids went. In layman's terms, from dysfunctional families, they lived there for a month, 2 or 3 months. They were treated, fed, tried to learn something. As a rule, these kids were very poor in their studies. For some kids during this time, everything changed for the better in the family. Parents would get coded, get a job. Then the kids would come home. If parents continued to drink, stab each other, and there was nothing to hang a mouse on in the refrigerator, the kids were sent to an orphanage. The rehabilitation center Michael saw looked extremely shabby. Over the years that the businessman was his patron, the institution has been transformed. Renovation, a huge plasma TV palace, in the game rooms toys, and a playground. On the walls were now painted fairy tale characters. Fresh fruit appeared on the tables, and the headmistress greeted Michael with such reverence. That's right. He was an Arab sheik, and she was his latest beggar. Nancy, too, had the joy of participating in all this. Many times she went to the stores to pick out a toy for one of the birthday boys herself, a dress-up doll, or a huge bear, or a wind-up train. And her new friends advised her to give Michael a baby of his own. He'd be a wonderful father. Nancy was a little afraid. Her mother told her that she had carried her only pregnancy extremely hard. She was lying in the bed. She was turned inside out almost until the birth, and she did not know what she wanted parents to die. There were moments when the second option seemed preferable, especially if it came right away. So when she tested positive, Nancy literally prepared herself to wait for the end. But pregnancy caused her only 3 inconveniences. She constantly wanted to sleep, and Nancy hated the smell of cinnamon and peppermint. It's nothing to take into account. Looking ahead, a persistent aversion to the memory persisted for life. Unlike the chicken, Michael asked if Nancy wanted to give birth in a private maternity hospital, but the young woman chose a regular one. At the district hospital, everyone said that the doctors there were very good, experienced, and even the most complicated cases ended well. But when 3 days before Nancy put the ward, it was paid, it is yes, and the doctors were discussing labor options. The young woman was in favor of a C-section with both hands. It seemed less scary to her. Later she realized that there are no easy surgeries in principle, and if the anesthetic injection is delayed even 10 minutes, you will feel like a little run over by a train. But Galka was lying next to her, the living example, skinny as a wall. She tried to get up sideways from the very beginning. I didn't moan or complain. In general, in that run on the floor was a lot of operated and cheerful elderly nurse at 6 o'clock shouted in the corridor. But what? Go wash. That was all secondary, though. The important thing was that Nancy had a baby girl, pretty as a doll. You could enter her in the Miss Baby contest. The name was Michael's choice, and he wouldn't let Nancy settle on any name suggested. Nonsense, mother, he said gently. As for luxury names, they used to be given to their children by the blatant, and now by soap opera fans, and the folk versions. Before, Daddy was asked to find a baby a prettier name, like the gentleman. Let's focus on noble families. Let's keep up the good manners. Nancy, while she was reading to her daughter, didn't listen too much to what her husband was saying. In fact, she didn't care as long as she didn't get sick. Michael hired an au pair. An elderly, pleasant woman came for a few hours a day, made the house cozy, filled the refrigerator. And it seemed to Nancy that even though she had warm conditions, she was still a zombie compared to the other women. Evelyn lay awake at night like in the movie From Dusk Till Dawn. Nancy wandered around the house with her so the little girl wouldn't disturb her husband. And during the day, Nancy went from room to room with ampulla eyes and often clung to corners. Her parents would come over to see their granddaughter. "Strange, and I was sure you'd have a boy," said the father. "At least one in our family. I thought the ultrasound said so. They're often wrong." "I like your house," Mom said. "It has a face. Michael is good. He appreciates things so much. He chooses them so carefully. Every table has a personality." It's all the rage these days to have apartments as impersonal as spaceships. It looks like an astronaut is about to swim into the room, push open the door of a secret closet, and pull out a spare spacesuit. But Nancy could not, like her mother, turn into a housefly, or rather, a smokefly. And when Alex grew up, Nancy started drawing. It was kind of unbeknownst to her. She'd never been to art school or even a studio before. And then her soul asked for creativity. Nancy bought some paint-by-numbers pictures of brightly colored parrots and a ship against the sunset. Mom had never heard of this kind of painting before. With a twinkle in her eye, she decided that her daughter had awakened a talent. "Well, it's all right if you slept a long time." Vaughn, Susan Boyle, at 47 years old, went on stage, sang with an angelic voice, and everyone went down. I mean, they stood up and gave her a standing ovation. Maybe there was a repin in her daughter too, and life was finally pushing him around. Nancy was amused. She tried to explain to her mom it was like embroidering a pattern. But for one thing, Mom was in a hurry to get to the hairdressers, and she didn't have time to listen. Second, she wanted to believe in miracles. And then Nancy brought home a third canvas and small plastic cans of paint. It was going to be beautiful, a winter night, a starry sky, a hut with a lighted window, a black forest in the distance, and a black fence. Pisanka was playing in the playpen with her cubs. Nancy picked up the brush, but in that instant she stopped, realizing that the clearly defined borders on the diagram had been drawn, and the numbers had changed shape, merging into something else. She drew quickly. Her hand was wildly accurate. Not once did the brush waver. She didn't even have to look at the numbers if she read them from the jar. And at the same time, she experienced a feeling that had never come to her before. That joy and awe, bordering on fear, that convinced her subconscious that something was being born from beneath my hands. Something more than I could. Still, she felt dizzy, and God knows how it would have ended. But in fact, it had run out of paint. 2 cans of black and blue were empty, and the rest stood almost untouched. Nancy, shaking her head. What a winter! What a cottage! There was no cabin in sight. Before her on the canvas was the corner of some dirty barn, and a boy thin to the blue, with bell-bottomed, dirty hair. She had never been able to draw a boy cat, would not have been able to draw much less a man. Nancy flung the canvas away from her, tossing it like a living thing. She didn't hang this painting on the wall. She slid it into a corner in her studio, covered it with sheets of absorbent cotton. But painting was becoming a need for Nancy, moreover, an addiction. The kind of withdrawal that happens without cigarettes, without the internet. With Nancy, without something to leave a mark on and something to leave a mark on. She began to catch herself sketching some scenes in pencil on wallpaper, in the margins of magazines, with her finger on the window. They had a girl like Kathy at school. Every time a lesson turned out to be boring, Kathy drew on the last pages of her notebooks, and drew exclusively high-heeled shoes, stiletto heels, high as stilts. The shoes were rose-colored or bowed with leopard or snake bows, but Kathy was drawn to graceful ladies' shoes. It was an excuse for her to keep her hands and mind busy. What about Nancy? What about shoes and bows? She herself was frightened by the drawings, as if something was appearing on the other side of the sheet that was staring her in the eye. Some male faces, sweat, compressed lips, a piercing gaze, possessed, devoid of pity, hands clenched into fists, some slums, and a screaming woman. Nancy made an appointment with a therapist. He was a short man with a red beard. Nancy later learned that he hated women. It happens. He always blames women for everything. They go away after their sessions, snot on their fist, and ashes on their heads. Nancy, Rick considered it a minor case. Enroll in an art studio, he advised. Let them teach you to paint what you like. And don't you try to do some housework. You must have neglected your husband with his laws. There was a group of amateur and novice painters in town. In the summer, we'd make arrangements and go out together on plein air. It was noisy and fun. The attention of spectators was not embarrassing, and the works were then brought to mind and exhibited. Nancy joined this company, left her nanny to the loom, and went with the artists to paint the half-ruined manor house. She hoped that in the presence of other people her hand, which had a life of its own, would behave decently. Everything started out splendidly. The young people were given a tour of the manor, fed a hot lunch in the school canteen, and led to a clearing where the desired view opened up. "Create, Nancy, please," said Nancy to herself. She had all she needed: paint, canvas, and a shift in her mind. She began to paint as carefully as if she were drunk. But there was no way she could show it. Great. Already the walls were outlined, plaster shaken, windows without panes, empty dark openings, tall grass that joined the dying house. Nancy started late to pour. She wanted to finish sooner to get away from the canvas, as if it was cold here, near it. But take 2 steps to the side, and it's a hot summer day again. "Oh," said Jenna from over my shoulder. "Who do you have?" Jenna was sort of the unspoken leader of their group. She'd been drawing for a long time. Sketching was quick and easy. She was clearly talented. Now she lived behind the artists and watched to see who was doing what. Nancy looked at her work and barely refrained from forcing again your mother. Yes, it was an old gentleman's house, perfectly rendered. Only there, it was by no means the height of day in the painting, but early twilight and black window openings ruled. And in the far right someone was there. Someone standing in the depths of the room, barely recognizable, and in the darkness only the eyes were clearly visible. Maybe the last light was falling on them. The eyes attracted and beckoned. Jenna was silent for a few seconds. "It's kind of creepy," she said. "Maybe you do not only draw, but also horror stories. What then? We will sell these pictures that we paint nowadays. And you know, but don't take offense, I wouldn't buy yours. I think if it hung in my room overnight, those eyes would glow." Changed her last name, middle name. She kept her name. True, no man ever called her Nancy. But Nancy was what was left of her old life. She wanted to get a license to carry at least a limited firearm. It was vital, and she was saving up the money. The only thing was to make sure it wasn't to the detriment of her posture. In the meantime, she went to the shooting range. At first she had to drive quite far, but then she got lucky. There was a park near their house, and there suddenly opened a small shooting gallery, which worked every day, even on weekends. At first, the owner was surprised by it unspeakably. Boys came to him, and sometimes girls and men came in, amusing themselves or proving to themselves that they are still wow. But this strange woman, who came here almost every day, and every time took a rifle with such a look, as if it was the main thing in her life. At first she was a private, a beginner, and often missed very often. Then the holes in the target began to get closer and closer to the black center, until finally they began to converge there and merge into each other. One day another regular at the shooting range asked Nancy, "Are you an athlete or just nuts?" She didn't answer anything, just looked at him intently. About a week after that, they found themselves near each other again, in a small pavilion. This uncle was inferior to Nancy in marksmanship, but not by much. "Have you got any money?" he asked carelessly between 2 shots. "Do you want to rob?" she inquired, noting the different tone of voice. Now he was talking. "Hard like that. Think about asking a second time, have you bought anything for yourself yet?" the uncle asked. But there are decent traumatics. We're just looking at them. Nancy, testing, looked at him. I mean, maybe you want something more serious. He asked nonchalantly. That's why I'm wondering how much you're looking for. Nancy put the rifle down and nodded at the door. Let's go out and talk. Christina knew her lover had a wife. Her heart ached, but it was bearable for now. I am a modern woman. That was the mantra. Perhaps repeating it 200 times would make it easier. But there's a wife out there in her own world. Home, baby, pacifiers, diapers. The wife will be there, and Christina will be here, and everything's fine. The chances of them crossing paths were practically nil. In the big city with the lifestyle Nancy led. Ugh, what kind of fossil name is she? No common acquaintances. Christina recently moved to a new neighborhood, bought a studio. She's a designer. Adds charm to faceless housing. Roughly speaking, she makes a little candy out of nothing. She and Michael are past and future. Does he have any Marie Antoinette tricks? She's got tomorrow. In the mornings, Christina went to the window where the sun poured in. No curtains. 24th floor, with only the sky above and the birds at arm's length. Soon something will be invented, and it will be possible to open the window to fly with the birds. That's not to say Christina didn't dream of what could be, but all dreams extended to the short term. Michael said tomorrow, we will go to a concert, to an exhibition, to a restaurant. He realized Christina in 4 walls to lock up ridiculous as a bird sometimes sounded. We'll fly to the sea or go on a cruise always, no longer than a week. Christina didn't guess. She knew that at home Michael talked about business trips and suppliers. And Nancy, busy with the babies, didn't give a damn where he was going. The head assistant came in every day. Christina was not the kind of girl for whom luxury and happiness are equaled. She valued impressions above all else, and if standing on board of a cruise ship, she stopped with delight. Admiring the northern lights, she, in general, it did not care whether her cabin was luxurious or not. Working with interiors and things, she was at the same time as if she was above it, honoring the power of nature, works of art, human feelings. However, Michael was not stingy at all. He gave her gifts very often. Christina's apartment and closet were replenished with many beautiful things, and she in her most secret dreams saw that one day he would buy a house in the woods by the lake. A house of wood and glass unlike anything her imagination had created. A house not even from the 21st century, but probably from the 22nd. The only thing that was incomprehensible about Michael was his attitude toward children. It was logical to think that he wouldn't leave Nancy because they had a daughter. But he never spoke to Evelyn, never mentioned her name. There wasn't a single picture of Michael with a baby girl in his arms in his phone. One time when Christina started questioning him, he asked her back, "Why would you do that? Are you trying to tell me you're seriously interested in my baby or jealous of me? You can't love her. She's my wife's daughter. Just don't go playing all goofy and fawning over pictures of the girl. The truth is, you wish she wasn't here. That's it. It's been like that ever since." But Michael talked about these perished children willingly and a lot. He talked about the new girls and boys at the rehabilitation center. He often went to see the kids, mentioned when he had managed to arrange someone's fate. It was all incomprehensible. But Michael had never fully opened his soul to anyone, and Christina only had to put up with the brackets of the man she loved. This week he told her again. A weekend away to the seaside. He never gave her much notice. At least she didn't have to think about anything. Tickets, hotels all appeared exactly by themselves, as if by magic. The only question Christina had was how many days to take things for. Of course, it was inconvenient. It was not uncommon to have to explain force majeure to clients, sorry, humbly, without going into details. The lover called. I can't refuse. Michael never talked about the house, although he often remarked in passing that they should not hide anything from each other. But he was hiding a great deal. Christina had realized it that very evening by the sea. Hell knows why this trip had turned out so well. Only 3 days absolutely and out of season. November and Russia. What to do in Russia in November by the sea? In a small hotel where students should live because it is about to close for the winter. In the meantime, there is a heater like a breeze. And for entertainment, counting the flies that died between the frames. But these 3 days have been crazy, beautiful. While it was light, Michael and Christina wandered along the shore and went far beyond all the wild beaches and the sea that doesn't care that the world is in the month of fall. The sea, which hadn't lost an ounce of its charms, lavished them with gifts that there was no one to collect now. All these shells are refugees of the depths. Christina could pore over them for hours. They sat in a cafe on the deserted, almost waterfront, or on the adjacent street, where in summer there is no crowding. The menu was sparse. Maybe the hosts did not expect guests at all, but they received Christina and Michael not even as guests, but as distant relatives, perhaps. They carried everything they could treat themselves to, and fish fried for themselves, and homemade wine, and bubbles, and buttery cheburiks, which a minute ago were grumbling in the pans. Michael tasted wine and invariably took a bottle with him. If it was a clear, starry night, they stood on the balcony for long periods of time. It overlooked the forest. There was nothing to fear that anyone would see cold, but they could get back into their blankets. They drank wine from the simple granite glasses that were in the room with the wine, and the huge southern stars, especially bright from the light frost, were moving away and closer, almost touching their faces. And if it rained, they drank wine in bed and listened to the noise outside the window. And there was the safest harbor in the world between the blanket and Michael's body. Christina did not breathe, and this harbor happiness overwhelmed her, and she was afraid that she would leave with her breath, dissolve into the air, and the night would end. Usually no one called Michael. Christina didn't understand how it was possible. So if Michael disappeared from her life, she wouldn't notice it at all, just as long as he sent money. Christina wanted to call and offer Nancy a payoff, but there was an invisible line she shouldn't cross. Asking Michael about the shared house to pay Nancy for it was not an option, and yet she was infinitely surprised when his phone suddenly rang at 200 hours. They were still awake, though the bottle was almost empty. And this time, it wasn't wine, but tincture. Christina's eyes were already draining, and Michael seemed to be just really drunk. He reached for his phone, glanced at the number, and answered it immediately. Then he went into the bathroom and closed the door behind him. He came out 5 minutes later. Christina had been flirting the whole time. Not a word, not a sound. She hadn't been around at all. But now she asked in a falsely sympathetic tone, "What's the matter with your daughter? Sick?" "Burned out," Michael said. He seemed to want to punch her with his fist. Then bullocks with excess of feeling. He was glowing with joy as Christina sat down, ready to share in his celebration. Dan, there was almost nothing left. Michael flipped the bottle over his glass, and there's nowhere to take more until morning. You don't leave me anything yourself. I'm wasted and fuming as it is. So what happened? Maybe if it hadn't been for that particular moment, she wouldn't have known anything for a long time. But it all came together. Christina listened. She was lying under a warm blanket, but her hands and feet had become icy cold. And when Michael, in turn, fell asleep, she somehow got to the balcony, hung over the railing, and vomited for a long time on the flying lilac bushes. Luxury furniture is priceless antiques, you say. Ha ha. 3 times. Nobody needs them, those kids, Michael said in a memorized voice. I always know before they're brought in that they'll be taken away from home to this very orphanage. If it's something worthwhile, then it's easier this way. Like they run away from home, and that's it. That's all they'll whistle or the money's gone. You know how many of these bids go missing every year? Where? All over the country. And from their own alcoholic parents. That's a godsend. And if it's something really big, it's crazy. Once in 100 years, a boy is like an angel, a girl like a doll, then you can get one from an orphanage. I'm sorry, they're not torn either. Things happen. Lost just like that. Where are they going? I didn't know if she was saying that or someone else. Into good hands, Michael said in the same confident, drunken voice. What do you think? I boil them in butter and pepper them just as good as they were. They won't be. What do you want? You want me to tell you all the schemes? It's a brandy thing. I thought the organs. Christina's voice got all thin. A squeak, not a voice. Come on, it's rare, Michael reassured her. I've done it a couple times, just not chicky usually. One time, and anyway, there was this tiny Botticelli painting. His hair was below his knees. 3 years old is also a piece of cake, and they themselves, of course. I only drive bridges. There were others watching. Mother turned away in the store, and did she disappear at all? It happens. And where is she now? In a good country. Favored daughter. Michael said it with such pride, as if it were his own daughter. She's probably forgotten her hometown 100 years ago. Little ones have short memories. The Glock turned out to be a great gun, though Nancy gave a sum worth mentioning for it, and for Dizzy. The gun had 2 hiding places, one in the car and one in the house. Nancy understood the dangers of illegal possession, but she wasn't going to reach for the Glock until the last minute. And then she wouldn't care about anything else, as long as they stayed alive, or at least the sled. Nancy couldn't relax for a minute because of her daughter, and the female was getting harder and harder to handle. In this school she was in now, the girl was new. It was hard to get acclimated. It took time. And when the class was embroiled in a story, newbies are best suited to be scapegoats. In this case, goats. Young guys from some developmental center came to the school with some kind of program or project. Nancy didn't get into all that. She didn't care. Much worse, it was all about her daughter. The young educators had to give a few lectures, show slides. I guess it seemed like career guidance after all. And it had to happen that the girls fell in love with one of them, who was particularly good-looking. Nick Alex, she had nothing to do with it. But that bunch of girls who ran the class, accustomed to the attention of the guys, the girls had no doubt that they would have an easy success here too. They began to flirt with the teacher, giggled, asked provocative questions, stuck notes in his jacket pocket. They would have loved to dress up and sit down, as at a disco, but they realized that in such a form the director would not let them beyond the locker room. And then the bags in their teeth and behind the parents. So then one of these girls right at the lecture, when the guy was standing between desks, put her palm on the back pocket of his jeans and slightly squeezed. At this point, the young man's patience ran out. He went to the principal and asked to be excused from that class. Emily's, old school ladies. Even Shannon stood up in dismay. The class teacher and both head teachers, the school psychologist, the parents and the ladies from the police were immediately on the alert. Put everyone on the register and all the way to graduation. That was the least the girls were firmly promised. The female, who due to the peculiarities of her biography, not only was not friends with boys, but in general shunned all representatives of the male sex, was afraid of them, and did not trust them, now fell under the crush. The very girl who had done all this, sodding so that she was burnt with water, claimed Alex put her up to it. No, she didn't go easy on him. Promised her $5,000 for that kind of fun. And the girl needed the money badly. Daddy got fired from his job, family starving at home. So I had to take her up on it. Stupidly, of course. Stupidly. Forgive me for being a fool. This version of the girl voiced in the office of the director. Immediately, the female was summoned there when she heard what she was accused of. She was so blown away that she threw herself into agony right in front of Emily. Fury empowered the female, threw the girl to the floor, and began beating her fists fiercely. Nothing like this had ever happened in the principal's office before. What's there to register? The victim's mother took her daughter to the hospital for evaluation. Nancy was tracked down by telephone and told to report to school in a quarter of an hour. Emily probably thought that Nancy would be even more horrified than she was and would burst into tears, simultaneously shaming her daughter and begging for her forgiveness. I can do that. When Nancy entered the study where the solemn judgment was being prepared, the only thing she could see was that she was very tired, dead tired. Nothing else. Do you realize what Camille has done? Her parents are going to sue you and the school. The press will be here today. Never before. Not even the boys. Nancy stood and waited for that goal of outraged voices to be silenced. She would be heard. She didn't wait. Took a piece of paper out of her pocket, unfolded it, and laid it on the table. Here's the application I'm taking from the school. She was offended by what a classmate accused her of. And this girl will suffer no consequences except bruises. I believe that's called a minor injury. How much do her parents want? Now, unfortunately, honor issues are solved by money, and we will file a countersuit for slander and moral damage. When they drove home to 40, really looked guilty. We'll have to leave again because of me. Nancy sighed. We will, but you're not the main reason. Tell me, what happened? Asked her daughter. You'll be fine. So it's him again. And Alex stared out the window. Both of them realized what was waiting for them. They would have to pack their things very quickly, in a matter of hours, and take train tickets with a transfer, or even two. He was seen in a neighboring town. Investigator Cindy Jabrailova told Nancy on the phone this morning. But why? Why didn't you catch him then and give him a life sentence? Both realized the question was rhetorical. Cindy and her assistants had done everything they could. Wasn't there a worse time to get pregnant? No, there wasn't. There was no more inopportune man to have a child with. Christina stared at the test and felt for herself what a stupid expression she now had on her face. And yet she was still hoping for a possible mistake. A test bought at the drugstore. And she compared it without realizing it to an inexperienced medical professional who only assumes but is not sure of anything. She made an appointment with the city's best gynecologist for an appointment that cost a fortune. She didn't care. The appointment was a week in advance. 7 days sounded ominous, like the movie The Call. With great difficulty, Christina managed to focus on work, on these projects that could never be abandoned. When the orders somehow managed to finish, the girl went around the room clasping her hands and something silently whispered, mouth, as if begging for something fate. Only 1%. She allowed herself to get rid of the child. Christina herself was given to her mother with great difficulty, a fictitious child. Long years of infertility treatment, when everything was put into motion. Parents turned to professors and grandmothers to drown. 100,000 sanatoriums, depression, attempted suicide, and finally, the long-awaited pregnancy, which could be terminated at any moment. Mom was on the reservation from the very beginning to the last day. And still Christina was born 7 months old. The girl imagined that something like this could happen in her life. God forbid. She would have been ready. Though yesterday she had not thought about it yet, to bring up this child alone, she would have raised him. She would have had enough strength, time, money, and most importantly, love. But there was no hope that Michael would accept her decision and leave her alone. It was a trait of his character. He believed that what was mine. I would not give it to anyone. And she was his girlfriend, and the child, in his opinion, would not belong to her mother, but primarily to him. Fate often suggests the answer to the question, what should I do? In an indirect, veiled way. So it happened, and with benefit. She went to the paid clinic as if she were going to be executed, and she was very surprised to see an old lady in line in front of her. Christina thought that only well-to-do ladies, for whom nothing is more important than their own health, were sitting here. No, there was an ordinary grandmother about 80 years old, thin and haggard. Her daughter brought her. She, of course, paid for the appointment, judging by how poorly the woman was dressed. It was a gesture of desperation. It is not known whether she would have come here for treatment or not, but she was willing to give her mother her last penny. Wendy was said to be a miracle worker, taking on almost hopeless cases. Christina entered the room after the grandmother was taken out, and from the scraps of conversation between the doctor and the nurse she realized that there was nothing that could be done, only relief. It was as if death had breathed on Christina. And when Wendy confirmed that she was pregnant, suddenly, for the first time in these nightmarish days, the girl was overcome with joy. The life she was now glimpsing was leaving, and there was no power to hold it back. But the new life was breaking into the light, and it was quite impossible to destroy it. "Thank you very much," Christina said. "No, if everything will be all right, I will be observed not in a paid, but in a regular consultation. Thank you." It sounded so sincere that the doctor's usual mask of sternness disappeared for a few seconds. Wendy smiled. "Good luck to you." Now it was necessary to do perhaps the most important thing, to slip away from Michael so inconspicuously, so that he would not go bankrupt, would not obstruct. Christina decided to walk like a swamp, prodding the ground in front of her. She didn't answer his calls right away. Sometimes she didn't pick up the phone at all. And the latter returned his calls, hoping to accustom him to this new attitude. Not right away, but he felt it. "Didn't you have another lover, or am I boring?" he asked, as if in jest. "Or do you have a schedule now? Today one, and tomorrow another. You're talking nonsense." "What schedule?" She did feel tired, but now she tried to make sure it was reflected in her voice. "Unloaded to the brim with work from the top. If you have the ability and desire to verify what I say, verify it." Michael brushed it off, but Christina knew he would not miss the chance to check. A few days later, he brought up the subject again, when she refused to keep him company at a country restaurant. "Why do you write so much? Do you want to earn money for what?" Christina was making extraordinary progress in the art of lying. She shrugged. "But you know, basically, I have my own life. It's not like I'm going to demand that you get a divorce and do everything I want. I'm gonna support myself. I want a country house, a computer, a minimum of 1,000 for 200 clients will travel, and I will work at home. I can see hotels with panoramic windows. Behind them, snow-covered coniferous forest. There's a fire burning in the fireplace. And I'll come to you." It sounded half a question, of course. "You know I'm not focused on men. I'm focused on work. So hearing you talk about cheating is ridiculous to me." Christina was calculating her next steps. She didn't want to leave the big city, and she hadn't thought about it until recently. But if she had to, her father, mother, and elderly grandmother lived pretty far away. She would say that grandma needed to be cared for. You can't entrust an old lady into someone else's hands. If she wants to, let her check on her. Grandma lives separately. She is already 86, and of course at this age there are no healthy. And the granddaughter's help is simply necessary. And yes, Christina will really go away. Mom always said if her daughter was going to have a baby for herself, she'd take it. And I don't care if it's from a Negro, or a Chinese, or the President of France. Mom added, emphasizing the extent of her selflessness. And then the day came when Christina came home, and Michael was waiting for her, lying on the couch. He had had the key to her apartment for a long time, but lying there, doing nothing. It was so rare that Christina thought he was even sick and wanted to stay with me so as not to infect the household. "Why didn't you tell me you were pregnant?" Michael asked. As something insignificant, Christina took off her boots in the hallway. She froze, dreading that moment when she would accelerate and face him. At last, she managed to control herself. "How do you know?" she asked. She took the grocery bag into the kitchen and began to sort through its contents, taking her time. Some for the fridge, some for the cupboard. "Didn't I tell you? Don't even try to hide things from me. You have to say things like that. There's nothing to talk about yet. It's still a symbolic term. I get it, you haven't decided what to do with the baby yet. But don't even think about getting rid of it. I'm guessing you don't want him. In that case, treat him like a commodity, a very expensive commodity. It's all pretty straightforward." When her eyes widened in horror, that's something she couldn't have thought of. "Could you treat your child like that yourself?" He grinned. "You should know what I'm up to." Christina closed her eyes and leaned against the wall to keep from falling. It had happened on the most ordinary day. The female was going into first grade then, and Nancy was all nervous, even though the school was close by and the kids could come home on their own. The parents of the little ones crowded at the classroom door long before the last class was over to pick up their children. There was nothing to sit on, but mothers and grandmothers stood in a tight circle and discussed. Everything seemed terribly important: what copybooks to buy, who and where took a physical education uniform, school meals, crumbs, first friendships and first feuds. They strayed from one topic to another, and when finally the bell rang and among the other guys came out tired, Nancy rushed to her with the question, "But how?" As if her daughter didn't have trivial math behind her, but at least the US. Then homework at home. Posture always did them under her mother's supervision. Together they collected a backpack for tomorrow, prepared clothes, and it was necessary to put the girl to bed on time, because Alex was not used to get up so early, did not fall asleep. For the first time she had shadows under her eyes. In short, the week was exhausting and scary for both of them. And if before they tried to plan something interesting for the weekend, this time Nancy decided not to go anywhere in themselves. We'll have a leisurely breakfast, watch a movie, order a hamburger and ice cream at home. Nancy anticipated that even after lunch it would be possible to take a nap or at least to lie down with a book, to bask in the bath. At that time her ideas of happiness were the simplest. But then Michael called, saying that he was suddenly free and had already taken tickets for some children's play for the evening. When Nancy heard this, her face hid so much that her daughter giggled. "Good thing Daddy can't see you," she said, but it wasn't theatrical. They were both in the mood. Didn't feel like pulling out the outfits, Dad's emergency. Like Grandma Nancy used to say, then drive a long way. I didn't want to sit in the audience. I wanted to relax for once. But Nancy knew Michael could insist, so with a sigh, she opened her closet and began going through the racks of dresses. They didn't have a lot of clothes. Nancy wasn't much into fashion or dressing up. Evelyn didn't care much for bows and bars at that point. Michael was to pick them up at 5 o'clock. It was just about to rain. It was starting to get damp, and it would have been so nice to stay home. But who knew that fate would grant their wish in the most unexpected way? When the doorbell rang, Nancy was surprised. Michael had never before forgotten to take the key. But when she saw blood on the doorstep of the not-so-young policeman, an accident, Michael was dead. If he had been alive, she would have gotten a call from the hospital. There was not a shadow of sympathy on the faces of the policemen, however. They had come for Michael, and she had been forced to let them into the house to make sure he was gone, and had been gone since morning. Nancy followed them as they went around the rooms. What happened? He hit someone. It was the first thing that came to her mind. If he hadn't been hit, then he might even be dead, or some kind of business problem. But then do the police suddenly show up at a house like this? She didn't understand much about any of this. But it seemed to her that if there were any financial problems, Michael should have been sent a paper or invited somewhere. "You're coming with us," one of the policemen said. "What about the baby?" Nancy was confused. How long is this going to take? How am I going to leave her? Alone? What's wrong? They'll explain everything to you there. Nancy called a friend and asked her to come and sit with Evelyn until she got back. If it's too late, you can stay the night at my place. But what she learned at the police station was the end of her former life. At a noisy intersection, Michael's car stopped at a red light along with other cars. In the back seat sat a girl of about 6 or 7 years old. The man, who was preparing to cross the road, saw the desperate face of the child, flew to the glass, and the girl, realizing she had been spotted, screamed help. Everything was decided by seconds. The man's reaction was lightning fast. He managed to open the car door, grabbed the hands of the man behind the wheel. A fight ensued, which Michael would no doubt have won. He was younger and considerably stronger, but taking advantage of what was happening, the girl got out of the car and ran into the thick of people, into the yards. Michael slammed the door shut, and the car sped away. The story was absolutely stunning. Nancy. What nonsense, she began. The husband had probably given that girl a ride. And as for the fact that she was calling for help, maybe there's such a family out there ready to blackmail to pay them. Faked a kidnapping. The young investigator shook her head. The girl had already been found. She's 7 years old. Her mom is a doctor, raising her alone. They were walking in the yard. The mother named her. The neighbors started complaining about her health. So the woman was only distracted for a few minutes, and in that time, the little girl disappeared. But that can't be. Everything that was happening seemed unreal to Nancy. It wasn't Michael. The man who hitched a ride with him got the make and license plate number. This man was hurt too, fortunately. Minor bumps, bruises. And the little girl, she didn't get far. According to her, everything happened like this. Her mom was out of sight, and this uncle opened the car door and called her. He said that mom was urgently called to the hospital, and she asked him to bring her daughter to her. The girl was lucky that she quickly realized something was wrong. Another girl would have driven on, hoping she was being taken to her mom. And there's almost a 100% chance the kidnapper would have gotten out of town. The two coincidentally ran a red light, and a stranger rushed to her aid. That's what saved her. Let me tell you something first. Nancy, my husband is not a maniac or a murderer. We have a daughter the same age as that baby. The investigator's girlfriend's voice turned cold. I don't know what the investigation will reveal, but now I wouldn't be surprised if you cover for him. Perhaps you knew about everything in advance. What are you talking about? I'm going to ask you questions, the investigator said, and you will answer them as truthfully as possible. Now the policeman's voice was ice cold. Then sign the report. Nancy was released in the late afternoon. The only way home now was by cab. Up to this point, Michael's phone, no matter how many times she called him, had not been answered. But suddenly, Nancy heard a familiar tune play in her purse and her husband's number pop up on the screen. But a moment before she bombarded Michael with questions, he said, "Be quiet. Listen to me, because I'm not calling again. I just got unlucky. I took the wrong job. Someone else should have done it, but that's just the way things are. Wait, wait, wait. Don't talk. You're right. I'm not a maniac or a murderer. Children are always okay. Now for a while, everyone's gonna lose me, including you. But I'll come back for you. Don't be afraid of interrogation. You have nothing to say. You really didn't know anything." As the investigation progressed, even those in charge of the investigation became uneasy, even though they were hardened men. It turned out that many were in the business and management in the rehabilitation center and in the orphanage. A peculiar price list was also discovered. Those parents who did not care whether their child would go to the state food or would be sent somewhere abroad received the least. Of course, not all children passed the selection process, and much mattered gender, age, health, and appearance. The case was widely publicized, not so much because of children from marginalized families, but because several girls from well-to-do families disappeared. The vain search lasted for years. It cost the parents a lot of money, up to and including the madhouse. And the clue lay close at hand. Now many people have been sentenced, and only Michael has managed to escape. Nancy had already been through a terrible shock. Her family had collapsed. She found herself the wife of an outcast criminal. But that wasn't all. She started receiving anonymous phone calls. She was intercepted at the front door of the house. "Your husband robbed us of our daughter. It'll be the same with your girl. We'll give you the last of our money. Hire a man, but be prepared." Although the young woman's psyche was teetering on the brink at the time, she didn't have the luxury of institutionalization. Investigator Cindy, with whom Nancy had interacted more than anyone else during this nightmarish case, and who far from immediately believed that the wife was not involved in her husband's affairs, knew nothing about them, gave the go-ahead to leave. Now Nancy remembered with heartache the time, how naive and soft she had been, how she had tried to hope for something good. They hadn't even noticed the tracks. They went to a southern town, but not by the sea, and not in a resort area. To make it cheaper, they rented an apartment. They had the most common surname. Nancy was resting from the fact that the bullying seemed to be over. She worked remotely and in grocery, hardware, and bakery stores. No one was interested in her past. As she settled the girl into school, she explained that the child needed a warm climate. Evelyn is often sick. We decided to try living here. If they like everything, they will sell the old apartment and move permanently. Of course, the old easygoing attitude was gone. Nancy felt guilty in front of the children's parents for loving a man for too long, breaking their lives, trusting him and not noticing anything. And yet it was a reprieve. Evelyn had begun real childhood again, with girlfriends and cartoons, with New Year's parties and princesses and different dresses, with dreams of what would happen tomorrow, in a day in the summer. And Nancy unwittingly made plans too. She really liked the landlord of the apartment she and her daughter rented. He was an old man. He himself lived in a small house on the outskirts of the city and rented the apartment. The one room was clean, with simple repairs and the most necessary furniture. Nancy paid regularly. She and her daughter were quiet tenants, so they had the kindest relations with the landlord. The old man preferred to come for money. In the beginning, he himself did not stay longer than 5 minutes. He made sure that the apartment and the tenants were all right. He put some bills in his wallet and said goodbye. Then he and Nancy got to talking. From then on, she started inviting Sebastian over for tea. The old man had lived a long life, was a keen beekeeper, and told many interesting stories about the town's past. And when Evelyn at the end of the evening timidly approached him and asked for permission to get a kitten, the old man was quite sympathetic and patted her on the head. "You can have a dinosaur." He gave her permission. They had already agreed that it was from Sebastian that Nancy would buy the apartment, for which he was asking a very reasonable sum, and they both got used to the place. And then the phone rang. The number was unfamiliar, and Nancy assumed that it was probably from the bank, another amateur credit imposition, or perhaps fraudsters posing as investigators. There were plenty of them now. But when she heard her husband's voice, she almost dropped the cell phone, dropped the call, stood with her heart. Michael called again and again, and again, until she finally answered, "What do you want?" He couldn't help but note the hatred that sounded in her voice. His own voice, however, sounded calm and even relaxed. "I just missed you. Forget this room and both of us forever. How much grief. Levchenko, listen to me." He continued to speak so serenely, as if it was a question of what to cook for dinner tonight. "Be patient a little longer. Soon I'll take you both, and we'll leave. If you need money, let me know and I'll wire it to you. It's a good thing you chose Pinsk." He named the very town they were living in now. "So small, out of sight. I'll let you know when it's time to pack. I can't call you often, you know, but you'll still hear from me or through my men. And he'll be out of our lives." So many feelings of pleading, rage, and disgust were put into these few words that even Michael was affected. There was silence for 2 seconds. "Song, do you really want to be alone?" Michael asked softly. "What do you mean alone? I don't think you'll go back to your mom. You've long since weaned yourselves off each other. Your father might need your presence, your help. Cirrhosis is such a thing. Maybe taking care of Dad will make you feel better about losing your baby." Nancy felt her eyes popping out of her orbits. "It happens in moments of extreme terror. I want to tell you a story that concerns you and me directly. You don't know, of course, that once upon a time during an operation, a sickly and beautiful little girl named Evelyn was born, and a sickly boy with multiple disabilities called cerebral palsy. You were sound asleep under anesthesia and didn't know anything. Why would you be so upset? So I decided to give you a gift. This little girl you got. Cost me a lot of money, but she's worth it, isn't she? And now you and I may be doing very well, or you may be doing very badly. Where is it now? I'm telling you, it's either really, really good or really bad. The hour will come when everything will be settled, everything will be prepared, and the three of us will go abroad, under different names, of course. And there, if you want to, you can see this child. But what if I don't? Evelyn's real parents are looking for her at Lessing. I don't expect you to believe me. Take a DNA test yourself at a lab of your choice. Get the results, and then I'll call you, and we'll have a good talk. She woke up on the floor, and it took her a long time to realize if she was still alive and functioning, or if she had had a stroke, for example. And now she couldn't move her arm. Somehow she crawled to the bed and frightened the female. Returned from school by the fact that she could hardly speak and did not think well. The girl cooked her own dinner, brought her mother tea and sandwiches. She knew about those who are sick. It is necessary to take care. But Nancy could not eat, and only made a sign for her daughter to leave her alone. It wasn't until nightfall that consciousness finally cleared. Now Nancy could not forgive herself that the conversation had ended this way, though it was not up to her. No matter how monstrous what Michael had said, Nancy had believed him, and now she was tormented by several questions at once: how to make her stay with her forever, because she would never accept that the girl was not her own daughter; how to find out what was wrong with her own son. Where is he? How to take him back to her. And finally, how to free herself from Michael. It was possible to go crazy from it, because to achieve all the goals at the same time, apparently, it is impossible. Or tie your life to a criminal you hate, or losing both kids. Another option to try to get out of harm's way at least. Nancy had never liked detectives, never read them. She didn't like feeling like a fool. For 100 or 2 pages, the author led the reader to a clue, occasionally giving clues, lighting up beacons. In the end, when it came to the last pages, the reader only had to slap his or her forehead. God, how could I not have guessed who the culprit was? It was so easy. But Nancy, now it seemed that she was in some surreal labyrinth, in some nightmare. And she didn't know how to get out, because she had no experience. She went to a nearby town, bought a cell phone, a SIM card that wasn't registered to her, and called Cindy the investigator. Never would she tell her the whole truth, because it would be taken away from her immediately and get to the bottom of who her real parents were. Nancy only said that Michael occasionally calls her with threats, so she wants to change her documents through the registry office, take a different last name, and cut off loose ends. Go somewhere where she and her daughter won't be found. She understands everything, but she is not going to become a live wire to catch Michael. She's a weak woman, and she's scared. Surprisingly, they backed her up, gave her the go-ahead, even put her in touch with some people. Just ask her to take her time and do it carefully. Maybe there'd be another call that would clear things up. There was a call, just not the one Nancy had expected or Cindy had hoped for. Later, Nancy decided it was her own fault. "How could you?" she asked. "You mean the boy?" He grinned, somewhat grudgingly. "He's alive, not starving. He could have gone to the showdown." "I've had that thought. Basically inferior specimens." That's when she screamed monster and started banging the phone against the wall, because the only alternative was to bang her head into the wall. The very next day, she rented a car, a house, and left with Evelyn, taking the bare minimum of belongings with her, and cut all ties. And there were new papers and new cities, and nightly prayers that the man who had created all this would disappear, dissolve, melt away like smoke without a trace, and that even if she never sees her son, God will take care of him wherever he is. But never, never again would Nancy be able to relax and everything else that came into her life, and that desire to learn to shoot. And these apartments she'd so carefully picked out with alarms, preferably backdoor, was the kind of craziness that would stay with her until the end. To give birth, Christina went to her parents. They were overjoyed. The rest of her acquaintances were perplexed to trade a huge city, where the apartment, career for a small town, in which to find a job. with a salary of $20,000, it is normal. And 30,000 means fabulous luck. That the girl came here. She's going to have a baby without a husband. It's a bad time. No one can blame her. And it's all over the place nowadays. But the parents didn't recognize the daughter and Christina, who used to come home only at night. It was like that since 15 years old, then at friends' houses, then at some parties, festivals. You'd never know as long as she called to say she was alive. Christina hasn't left the house right now. And not to say that she was not feeling well, but all day long either lay with headphones, with the phone, or sat, and as a model mother, undermined diapers. In vain. Her mother tried to send her at least to the store, at least to the park for a walk. And every day the parents noted in the daughter more and more oddities. More than once or twice a day, she came to check if the front door was locked. She couldn't stand it when someone came without prior arrangement. She made her mother ask who to look through the peephole. And if she was home alone, she never opened the door for anyone. What happened? One time, my mother couldn't take it. Did you get ripped off or something? Christina only shook her head negatively. But her mother's imagination knew no bounds, and she whispered in the kitchen with her father. There must have been a theft after all. And probably even threatened. Maybe with a knife. Oh, what if she'd been abused? And a baby. Here already Christina could not stand it, came out, and asked tired, "Mom, what are you talking about?" Write novels. We're novels to real life. Olechka, don't be afraid. We'll bring up even from Freddy Krueger. Oh my God. I think I'm drunk, even though I'm not allowed. Daddy, would you tell her? I've told you 100 times. A married man, that's all. Doesn't run around with gloves, fingers, blades, and a striped sweater. Christina took a whiskey. That's right. She got a really bad headache and retired to her room. Her son came into the world quite safely. The labor had been easy. The only thing the midwife didn't like was the birthmark on the boy's cheek. When he's a little older, see a surgeon. You will operate, she said sympathetically to the young mother. The fact that Christina was even happy about this cosmetic effect was beyond her imagination. And Christina thought most of all in this market are good-looking girls. A boy with such a flaw wouldn't be of interest to him. Probably not. She convinced herself of this, and yet she was afraid to let the child out of her hands. Other mothers, especially experienced ones, willingly agreed to let their infants spend the night in the pediatric ward and bring them in for feeding in the morning. Good night. This is a luxury. When else will there be an opportunity to sleep for hours on end, to recuperate? And Christina wanted her son to sleep not in a crib, but with her, between herself and the wall to crush the little one. Scolded the midwives for sleeping and imagining. Christina put her son in the crib, but at night, when the lights were turned off in the room, she still did her own thing. Though it was foolish to think anyone would break in, no one disturbed her. She was discharged from the maternity hospital, and for a while she led the life of a recluse. All was quiet, no call, no letter, much less a visit. Although if desired, Michael could easily find out where she lived and who she gave birth to. Gradually, she began to walk with a stroller, and when Benjamin began to walk, she already let him play in the sandbox with other children. But Christina never agreed to do the operation, even though her parents persuaded her to do it later, she said. Benjamin went to kindergarten. They were preparing for the matinee, and Christina was going to dress up her son in a night costume. That's when the phone rang. "Do you need anything for your son?" Michael asked, as if they'd broken up yesterday. And since he didn't hear the answer, I continued, "That's why I'm asking, because I'll be leaving soon for good, and it's unlikely that you'll be able to contact me afterwards. Do the operation, Benjamin. We are beautiful. And our guy should be just as good. I'm sorry about the way things turned out between us. I'll see if I can help you guys later. But right now, I have to get Nancy out, even though she doesn't know it yet." Christina had a client Christina used to do her apartment. It took 3 wagons and 2 carts of patients. Today, everything was agreed upon, down to the color of the lid on the washing machine in the bathroom. But in the evening, the client had dinner with a friend that tossed her fresh ideas, and in the morning, the carefully crafted project fell apart like a house of cards. One idea pulled the next, and there was no end to it. In the end, Christina S. canceled because she saw it wasn't working, and she cared about her name. God forbid the client will start bragging about who designed her apartment. Christina brought the client to her home. "Oh," said the woman and sank down on the couch to take a slow look. "I like it. Please do me the same." The issue was resolved, and now this same client helped Christina get the addresses of Nancy's parents. She had the right connections, and the matter took half an hour. Addresses, phone numbers. There was no way a father and mother wouldn't know where their daughter and granddaughter were. Christina called the mother first. The woman appeared to have a very young, gentle, and cold voice, although Christina had manufactured and rehearsed in advance what she would say. To be brief and to the point, you do not find that the friend of the ex-husband is not the best recommendation. Nancy's mother asked with a slight sneer. "We both know what kind of husband he is. And I know what you mean by friend. I won't tell you Nancy's address. And don't you dare blackmail me with the danger she's in. Don't call again." There was one last hope for her father. Christina tried calling him several times, but no one picked up. Finally, when she had given up hope, she answered, judging by her voice, "Some old woman, and he sold the apartment," the old woman said, after she found out who the neighbors were. The last thread had broken, and he hadn't left a new address or even a phone number. Christina begged because she had no hope anymore. "Did you buy this apartment?" "No, I was his neighbor," the grandmother explained. "And he's in a hospice. But you know, the one on Nicotinsky." The parents agreed to look after Benjamin. When Christina saw Nancy's father, she immediately realized that he didn't have much time left, maybe only days. His face was yellow, like a mask of skinny lice. The man was lying in the ward, and at the appearance of the guest, did not even make an attempt to rise. He no longer had the strength to do so. Christina moved a chair closer, sat down, and spoke openly. She had no other choice but to reveal her cards fully. She told both about her long association with Michael and about the fact that, while she knew of Nancy's existence, she hadn't considered it, and about the fact that she hadn't known she could hate like that. And if Nancy was not warned now, there was a glass of water by his table, and in it was a pipe. Christina understood what that meant. The man can't lift his own head, and he can't take the glass. Someone has to put that tube in his lips. The man still had the strength to touch her hand with cold fingers. "I believe you, especially since I can't protect anyone else. That man has deprived me of even having my daughter by my side when He sighed. "I sold the apartment to buy her a house. It was picked up at my request by a small town in the cabin, a small fortress. Bars on the windows, iron doors. Even a cellar under the house that you can climb into and lock yourself inside. A kind of safe for people who need protection. And I'm the only one who knows the address. I'll tell you. Remember it. It was a nice little town that must have looked marvelous in the summer. But never before or anywhere had Nancy been treated with such longing, and the house her father had chosen for her suited them perfectly. It stood on an eminence from which everything was perfectly visible. It was like a little fortress. But Nancy was unpacking and crying, trying to hide her tears from her daughter. She had to be with her father now, though he understood and had forbidden her to come. Said he would call her when he felt like it. What kind of forces were helping this ghoul who had broken her life time after time? And not just her. How does he keep finding her over and over again? Was he aided by some extensive network of helpers, or was he working with a psychic? Nancy was ready to believe anything, but had to pull herself together and start over once again. Amazingly, every time Nancy felt like the strength was gone, completely gone. Even on the driveway, it would come from somewhere, and she would do what she needed to do again. She walked around the house from attic to floor, checking every door, every frame, making sure the bars on the windows were secure and the locks were in good working order. When she started checking for the third time, she was convinced she was getting paranoid. She was very thirsty. Nancy rarely allowed herself that, but right now she'd give anything for a couple cans of stout beer. But what there was, she generously squirted into a cup of valerian, squeezed water. It turned out to be a brandy version. Nancy drank it in one gulp. "So what's school like here?" Alex asked. Her mother could no longer completely hide the danger from her, as she had done before. But the girl's psyche was still surprisingly plastic. She was not in danger of depression. She didn't like her new room very much. It wasn't that it was small, but the window faced north, and on top of that, it faced a blank fence. Alex hung posters of her favorite artists on the wall. With familiar faces staring back at her, she felt at home everywhere. "I don't know," Nancy shrugged for now. "Let's think about homeschooling." "Cool. You'll be able to go out at least some of the time." Nancy felt in this question the longing of a creature locked in a cage and longing for a little freedom of a mother who limits her sick children in something. One realizes otherwise it is impossible. No one can make their child live by other rules. But by 40, she was healthy. She should be out riding her bike with her friends, going to ballroom dances and birthday parties with her girlfriends. And Nancy keeps her in a cage. "Give me a week." She asked her mother to look around. "I'll see what's going on and decide." Alex took a deep, deep breath. And Nancy, looking at her daughter's face, wondered how she hadn't noticed it before. No, she knew Alex was nothing like her. Not one bit. Not a single trait in common. But Michael seemed to have something in common. Girls often look more like their fathers than their mothers, and vice versa. So her son looks like her. But why was it all just on her shoulders? Nancy honestly tried to recall if she had fallen in love with anyone in her youth other than Michael. But at least there were some portraits on the walls like a female. Had she married too young? Yeah, maybe when she was watching action movies. Michael loved the genre, sometimes identified with the heroine, whom the hero saved from every conceivable and unthinkable danger, with whom there is no need to be afraid. And day and night the brain will not be drilled with thoughts. Have you foreseen everything? No need to think about anything. It's like being behind a stone wall. One of her friends had a husband who looked nothing like a movie hero. An old man, a little heavy and completely gray, a former military pilot. Oli had a severe form of diabetes. Her daughter was born with Down syndrome. But how Ethan loved his girls. How he worried about forgetting to take their medication. He planted a Garden of Eden for them outside his house. His friends gave them to his daughter, because riding is, you know. Even when she, Nancy, who seemed to have nothing to do with Ethan, was near him, she felt safe, as if nothing bad could happen to her. A week had passed in the new place, and the promises made to Hanka had to be fulfilled. In the morning, Nancy said, "I will go to the bakery." But the habit she had lately acquired of carrying a gun with her always and everywhere, she could not give up. If any policeman tried to search her, it would end badly. Nancy fell only on the fact that it would never occur to anyone in a small town. Auntie goes to get bread, crosses the road at a green light. What do you gentlemen in uniform want with her? The day was surprisingly nice. They loved flowers in this town. Here and there in the front garden they were memorialized with velvets, Honey Wendy. The majors were rising proudly. Nancy remembered that as a child she could not remember the names of these flowers. They were called Lieutenant Colonel. You promoted them too. Father laughed. She lingered in the bread store, taking some pleasure in shopping for the first time in a long time. The bread smelled so good here under arrest. Such beautiful cakes lay in the display case. Nancy was choosing what to take for breakfast. What would please the loaf of kolache, poppy seed pies, yogurt with peaches, a simple loaf for sandwiches, delicately pink sausage. She was approaching the house when someone sitting on the low metal fence stood up and stepped toward her. Hi, a tall man in a black jacket, a cap covering not only his forehead but his eyebrows as well. It took Nancy 2 seconds to recognize Michael had already overwhelmed her. Maybe if Nancy had been a professional fighter in the military, training to the point of complete automaticity of movement, the gun would already be in her hands. But the shooting range was one thing and another. She'd never pointed a barrel at a live target, not even a rat. Her only hope was that he didn't know she had a gun at all. "Let's talk," he said peacefully and even with a smile, like he was just a regular Sunday butterfly who had come to make arrangements to visit the baby at a certain time. There were so many words Nancy wanted to say, and they were tearing from her throat. But she restrained herself to let Michael speak first. "What does he want?" "We'll go away," he said. Finally, it all came together. All the docs are in hand. It's a great opportunity waiting for us. We're going to Europe. Small town too, but not as shit as here. We'll have our own house waiting for us. I'll continue doing what I love, selling fashion secrets. You'll grow tulips. We'll put posture in a good school, just like the one you went to when you were a kid. He kept his trump card up his sleeve. And if you want, you can see your son once in a while. I don't think he should be taken away from where he lives now. Handicapped people don't belong amongst ordinary people. But my dear, how long will it take you to pack?" "We're not going anywhere with you," she said. He raised his eyebrows. "But you realize that in this case you never will, and I'll try to find him myself. But even if you don't, you've heard read your ears 10 times. I'm not going anywhere with you, and you're not taking me to the bank." Michael stared at her for a long time. Maybe a minute, maybe even longer. "Well," he said, "this was practically your last chance. There's a spark of hope left, so to speak." He held one hand down, and now something clicked distinctly in it. Nancy shuddered, but remained silent. Then Michael spoke. "You want to know that it's now a fire starting in your house, a remote control, the kitchen catching fire. And it's going to go very fast from there. Your plan, my house, my fortress is now playing against you. Bars on the windows, iron door. You won't open it, by the way, while you were buying caps. That's clever. It didn't take a man to pull a key out of your pocket, so the sled won't get out of there. She might last longer if she guessed to hide in the bathroom. But smoke and fire." Michael shrugged. "They'll get her anyway. And I don't see a man with a car nearby to snag a rope, rip the bars off the window. And don't look at me like I'm an animal. That's not my daughter. And that girl has nothing to do with me. Of course, I can still open the door. Do you have the key?" asked Nancy. The gun was already in her hand. One thing she hadn't expected was that he would knock it out with an elusive, sudden movement. What didn't he expect? It was that the weapon would fly at the girl's feet, which approached them at that instant. Christina had never known how to shoot. She didn't know anything about how to load a gun, didn't know what a safety was. Only in movies had she seen the trigger pull, her hands shaking. She was just so damn lucky. The day was so overcast that at 12 o'clock it felt like dusk. Nancy's route was from cemetery to cemetery. She hailed a cab and asked to be taken to her father's house. The plot was new, and just beyond her father's grave, there was still a forest growing, pine trees standing. And the ground here was bloody bad, just rocks. Nancy, like many people, came to the cemetery and distracted herself with thoughts. We should order some proper soil, plant some flowers. No, Dad really liked the smell of pine needles. Sooner or later the big spruce trees cut down the forest, and on the grave she'll plant dwarf ones. And the monument she had already looked closely at, a simple granite one, with a white marble rose that lay on top. She wanted very much to hug the cross and sob like a little girl in her voice. Nancy knew what she would do, so a little later she would come home. And while Alex is at school, she will drink a glass of vodka and cry and even howl and bang her head on the table. But right now, hold out a little longer. The cab driver wasn't leaving. She asked him to stick around. Nancy gave him the address of another cemetery in the suburbs. "You have a memorial today," the driver clarified. He was in a good mood and wanted to talk. The passenger seemed calm. but he couldn't talk to her. When had he turned on the music? Nancy walked slowly toward Michael's grave. It's 40 days today. One could only hope that his soul would never return from hell. A turn in the alley, then another. There was someone at the grave. A woman in a coat so deep red you couldn't take your eyes off her red hat with a little boy in her arms. Had she really come to? As Nancy approached, the woman turned around and Nancy recognized Christina. Christina lowered Benjamin from her arms. "I've been thinking," she said, as if continuing the conversation. "Why is there a cross here? There should be an aspen stake. I've been thinking about that too." It was autumn. No frost, no tears. Nancy wiped her face with her gloved hand. "But he won't get up. Can we have a dance?" asked Christina in a whisper. "I wore boots with sharp heels on purpose. You can do it on the loose clay." On the red hill, she tried to dance something like an awkward read-along with the sharp heels. Nancy put her arms around her and pressed her against her. They stood in silence for a long time, and then sat down on a bench that stood by another grave, but not far from where Michael lay. "What about you?" Nancy asked. "I'm going back to my house for good." "And you, Christina, have you been crying?" "I'm looking," said Nancy. "I don't know if I'll find it or not, but I'll keep looking as long as I live. And I don't have any leads yet. All I know is that in Europe they're going to walk to every home for the disabled, every orphanage. Maybe he's living with a family somewhere. You don't even know a name." Nancy shook her head, only that he would probably look like me, even though he's very sick. "And what about Evelyn? I mean, you realize now what it's like for her real parents. I'd like to get her to 18 so she's not taken away from me, so she can decide where she wants to go, who she wants to be with. But I realize that for the people who lost her every day is an eternity without her. I don't know. It's really hard to think about. Maybe we worked it out somehow. I don't know what kind of people are out there. I need to see them. What's next? God knows. We live as a family. Or have her stay at my place or theirs by the time she's 40. How he tied it all into one devilish knot." Nancy waved helplessly. Benjamin became bored. He wandered between the graves, examining them. On one sat a white stone dove. On another, a plump angel spread its wings. On a third, an aunt with a long blanket on her head covered her face with her hands. She seemed to be crying, and here there was a candle lit. "Careful, it won't fall on any reward." His mother shouted to him. "What's decided about the operation?" asked Nancy Christina. "It's a piece of cake for any plastic surgeon," she replied. "Maybe I'll wait until after Benjamin goes to school. I understand about the painkillers and all that, but I have such a low pain threshold right now that I can't even squash a cockroach." "Your house is a work of art. Are there really cockroaches in there?" They laughed. It was a kind of laughter, a timid little audible one. And yet, Benjamin knew which grave they had come to. It was dull to the point of disgust. Dull, red earth, and nothing else. Near one of the monuments there were roses in a stone vase. Benjamin pulled one flower, a dark red poe, that seemed particularly beautiful to him. Benjamin decided to put the rose on the grave of the man for whom his mother and that aunt were crying. "No," the women shouted with glee. Surprised, Benjamin almost dropped the rose. The rain had stopped freezing. It was a little brighter around. Even a bird made a sound. Benjamin went over and, taking advantage of the fact that his friends were talking about something, he shot the flower, shot it, strangled it, and started dropping petals in their laps.